Committee Room 29, sound. 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 Committee Room 29.
Okay, members, thanks for joining us all today. I just want to, before we go into the agenda, welcome Andrew to the committee. Today, Andrew will be joining us hopefully on a more formal basis, but I just want to put to the committee that members are content before the item of business next week in the Assembly Chamber that Andrew does join us for today's proceedings. Is all members content with that?
Definitely.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, if you want to take a seat.
Yep.
Okay, apologies. We're not aware of any apologies, No. Declaration of interest. Remind members that they are obliged to declare any relevant financial or other interests which might reasonably be thought by others to influence their approach to the matter under consideration. Any members who have interests to declare in relation to today's business should do so now or when the particular matter arises in the meeting. So does any member have any interests they wish to declare? No. Okay, chairperson's business. There's none. Draft minutes is a page 4. At page 7 you'll see the draft minutes of proceedings for the meeting on the 8th of May 2024, and I'm seeking agreement that members are content that the minutes are a true and accurate reflection of the meeting on the 8th of May 2024. If so, if you're content, I'll sign the minutes now. Content?
Content.
Okay, so item 5 is matters arising. Do any members have any matters arising from the meeting on the 8th of May 2024? No matters arising, no.
Okay.
Okay, so we'll move on to correspondence. At page 16 you'll see the correspondence memo. At page 17 there's correspondence from the President of the Northern Ireland Federation National Association of Funeral Directors requesting to meet with the 4 lead party representatives who sit on the Infrastructure Committee. There's a couple of options in terms of how we could do this. One of the options would be that perhaps myself and the Deputy Chairperson could meet with them in an informal basis as a first off. And then if other committee members wish to attend, they could do so. I was just thinking that that might be a cleaner way of maybe doing it, considering we're looking...
They don't want to meet me. I was the one that raised the plate too.
Okay. Members, are you content with that approach, or does anybody, we can organise it in a different way if people wish?
Excuse me, have any indication of what their issues are? I know they've said inequality or whatever. Have any idea?
So that is in relation to the Class C. That we've been talking about with the taxi industry as well. So it's obviously the same as wedding cars and things as well. So, but they wanted to sort of outline what it is like for their industry, I suppose.
Yeah, Chair. I mean,
sorry, Cathal. Yeah.
Sorry, through you, Chair. I mean, in the past, what we've done if we hadn't had to invite them, one member from every party would have sat in and had uncovered it in that way. But I'm happy enough to attend. Okay.
Yeah, I'm happy enough with that.
Yep.
Deputy Chair. Yeah, happy Cathal attends as well. We'll notify everybody anyway whenever we've got a date arranged for them. If people want to attend, I just think we've got quite a heavy agenda as we come up towards the assembly recess, and I thought rather than have an informal session for all the committee, I would just give people that option. So happy with that. Okay, at page 62 there's correspondence from the Committee for Finance regarding the draft executive budget for 2024-2025. So I want to inform members that the vote for the 2024-25 budget is scheduled for the 28th of May. In view of that, the committee staff had asked if DFI would be able to brief the committee on its budget position in advance of that date. However, the department has advised the outworkings of its allocation will be under consideration for a few weeks, and officials will not be able to provide anything further to the oral evidence session provided on the 20th of March before the debate and the vote, which will take place on the 28th of May. However, officials do believe that they will be able to be in a position to provide more details in time for the meeting on the 29th of May. So do you remember we'd asked for the breakdown in terms of the bids that went in and all of that. So they reckon that we will have that. Mark, do you?
The vote is on the 28th of May.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's not much use to this then, really.
Yeah.
But
Budget vote, is that, Chair? Is that the budget vote, you say?
Yeah.
As I heard yesterday, it was being pushed back to the week after now, the start of June, is that?
It was pushed back and then it was.
It's on the provisional.
Okay.
It's on the provisional for the
Late
20th.
yesterday, I was told that, okay.
Yeah. I know
not
it is
ideal,
highly frustrating, and I get that because as members and obviously as a committee, we're going to be going into the chamber and essentially, we've had a briefing, but we're not seeing exactly the outworkings of that, and it is highly frustrating. I get that. Be assured we have been making points in relation to that. So,
Chair, is there any point we're voting on it one day and seeing it the next?
Yeah.
That's right.
yeah,
No point getting it.
yeah.
I don't know what to say to that, to be honest.
I know. It's actually really, it's ridiculous because in a way, if you think about it, they're going to have had it all in place before that vote anyway, but
I think it's an insult, Chair, to the scrutiny committee and the role
Yeah.
this committee is meant to provide. It's almost
Yeah.
pointless having them even there. It's an insult.
are you happy if we make those points in a formal letter to the department just in relation to that? Because I think it's good to maybe put those points down, although we've been trying to push to make sure that we had our scrutiny and proper scrutiny of it before the vote took place. I think it would be worthwhile reiterating that again as a committee as a whole, taking into consideration the discussion we've just had, because obviously, the way we're doing the budget is very different, but at the same time, as you say, it's an insult to the committee in terms of our scrutiny role, and certainly we have our priorities too in terms of where we would like to see the money going So I think it's important that we make that case as a committee to make sure that that doesn't happen again, that there's not a precedent set there in terms of the committee being sort of cast aside in terms of its role. Members content with that? So also just seek an agreement to respond to the committee as well for finance, advising that the committee will not receive oral evidence on the Department for Infrastructure's budget allocation until the 29th of May, and providing a link to the Hansard of the oral evidence from the 20th of March. And if you're in agreement to respond back to the Committee for Finance in regards of providing a copy of DFI's written evidence from the meeting on the 20th of March. Are you content with that? Thank you. At page 64, you will see correspondence from the Royal Society of Ulster Architects regarding concerns over York Street interchange. The extract from the Minister's response on the 26th of April providing more information on York Street interchange is at page 69 for members' information. So I just want to inform members that the Royal Society of Ulster Architects correspondence sets out a number of what they state are alternative lighter touch proposals which would benefit which would provide many of the benefits of the current proposals, and most importantly would be affordable. So I'm just seeking agreement from members if they're content that we maybe forward that correspondence to the department for their views on the proposals and confirmation of whether such alternatives are even being considered. Members content with that? Yeah. Okay, at page 70 then you will see the outstanding request for response, and I'm asking members to note. So are all members in agreement, or is there any issues you want to raise out of that? Agreed. Happy. Okay. At item 7, So, again, I'm asking members just to agree all the other actions as per the correspondence memo. All agreed? Yeah.
Agreed.
Okay. So, item 7 is overview of the role of Department for Infrastructure Rivers, and this is the Department for Infrastructure's oral evidence. So page 76 you'll see the clerk's memo, at page 79 you'll see written evidence, at page 86 you'll see the extract from the Department for Infrastructure's written paper dated 28th of February 2024, Watery and Departmental Delivery Group. And I'm seeking agreement that today's evidence is recorded by Hansard. Are everyone content with that? Yeah?
Agreed.
Okay, so welcome to the committee. It's good to see you here today. We're really pleased that you could join us. So we're welcoming today Mr. Jonathan McKee, Director of Rivers Development DFI, Mr. Gary Quinn, Director Rivers Operations DFI, and Mr. James Kelly, Rivers Operations DFI. So thank you very much for joining us today. We do have obviously written information as well, so I'm just going to let you briefly for about 5 minutes or so introduce yourselves and talk to the issues, and then I'm going to invite questions from members. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, and good morning, members. Firstly, we welcome this opportunity to present the work of both Rivers Directorates, and we're conscious that you've received the briefing, and we really only want to outline some of the highlights and draw attention to some particular points of interest, and that's to leave maximum time then for questions if you're content with that, Chair. So, Rivers Directorates, there are two of them, an Operations Directorate, which is headed by my colleague Gary here, and a Development Directorate, which is headed by myself. We're part of the Water and Departmental Delivery Group, and you'll recall back in early March you received a briefing from the group as a whole, so we're two divisions within that overall group. We're the statutory authority for drainage and flood risk management from rivers and the sea, and that's an important distinction. We don't have overall responsibility for surface water flood risk. We're also responsible for the implementation of the rivers elements of the flood risk management plan, and that's a requirement of the Floods Directive regulations. We also don't have statutory responsibility for water quality or coastal erosion issues. Those are often matters that people assume rivers have responsibility for. In the papers, you'll see our overall structure and the breakup of responsibilities. I won't draw particular attention to that. I think it's important just to highlight the scale of flood risk here and how big the problem is that we're trying to manage. So 45,000 properties are presently at risk of flooding. When you factor climate change into that figure rises by approximately a third. So a very significant and real risk here in terms of flood risk. But the department has been proactive in how we have managed that risk. Flood risk management plans were developed and published in 2015. They were again refreshed in 2021. And really there are three pillars in those flood risk management plans that give us the direction in terms of how we do our work. Prevention, protection and preparedness. So the prevention piece is all to do with how we advise planning authorities in the management of flood risk. The protection aspect, or the protection pillar, details our maintenance activities and our investment in flood alleviation projects and our capital investment in our existing assets. And then the preparedness pillar deals with our preparations for emergency response and our community resilience work. We're very conscious that we've got high-level documents. So the flood risk management plan is our strategic document, and the long-term water strategy would sit above that. We have good policies and procedures and operational practice for our staff to follow, but there's a need for a bridging document that allowed staff to understand how that their work contributed to these higher-level plans and strategies. And so we developed the Rivers 6-year strategy, 6 strategic priorities which are listed there in the pack. And at the very top of that is a sustainable staffing structure and expertise. So it's not just about capacity, staff numbers, it's also about that expertise that we need to manage flood risk here. Maybe as we go into some of the questions and for the briefing we'll elaborate on that as to how we develop our flood risk management expertise here. Investment in flood risk management infrastructure is also very important, and we need to keep doing what we have been doing, investing in our existing assets and providing new flood alleviation projects. The continuance of service delivery is one of our priorities. It's very often the forgotten piece, but just continuing to do what we do, the maintenance activities and that routine flood risk management work is vitally important, and it's important that that gets a focus, that we don't just pursue the new things all the time. It's important that as an organisation that we're adaptable and outward looking. So very often there's a sense that there's greater expertise in other jurisdictions, but actually we have been mindful and careful to develop our own expertise here, and we engage with flood risk management organisations in the Republic of Ireland and England, Scotland and Wales and even further afield to share with them what we do and to gain some understanding of what they have learned and how that we can maybe utilise that in our work. So the document is a bridging document between high-level strategy and our work and practice, but it's also a listening document so that staff can understand that if there's problems and difficulties that they're facing, how we as a senior team can bring those into a document that puts focus on delivery and focus on the resolution of some issues. Planning and flood risk management, I think in our March briefing we covered quite well, so I don't intend to particularly highlight that. It's a very important part of what we do. The cheapest way to manage flood risk is to avoid that risk in the first instance, and the planning process is vital in that. Capital investment in flood risk management infrastructure continues. Last year we invested 20.5 million. That was well up from what we were investing, say, 5 years ago. 7.8 million was invested then, and we have further plans for investment subject to budget allocations. It's also important to note that our past investment in flood risk management work really has already provided substantial benefits to communities. So Newry suffered considerably during the flooding at the end of last year, but those impacts would have been much, much worse had it not been for the investment that we had already made in Newry. Properties to the east of the town hall would have been really badly impacted, but they were protected by the flood alleviation scheme that had been built a number of years ago. Belfast Tidal's a flood alleviation project that's ongoing at the minute. A difficult project, but it's going to offer protection to 1,500 homes in Belfast from tidal flood risk. And the committee is welcome if you would want to visit that work. It's ongoing at present, and it's an interesting project. There's a range of other projects which are ongoing in a number of areas, and no doubt we'll touch on those as questions emerge. Who has responsibility for flooding emergencies is also a key area that needs to be considered. We've spent a lot of work over this last decade developing our own response capability and fulfilling the role of lead government department, and later in the briefing I'll maybe refer to what that is and what it isn't, because there's some important distinctions there to tease out. And we've also been very proactive in community resilience work, developing a strong network of community resilience groups here in areas of known flood risk. I think it's important also to say that despite the work that we've undertaken to manage flood risk here, whether it's maintenance or capital investment or emergency response and community resilience, it's entirely possible that there could be a rainfall event of such a magnitude that it would overwhelm drainage infrastructure, whether it's natural or man-made, or overwhelm our ability and our multi-agency partners' ability to respond. So it's not possible to prevent all flooding from occurring, and that's something that we're seeing increasingly with more intense or more prolonged storms. Perhaps a key question for members will be what has the department been doing since the recent flooding in October and November 2023. Obviously the emergency response there involved not only ourselves but our multi-agency partners, and many properties were protected because of that. A review is underway in line with the processes surrounding civil contingencies, and a phased approach has been adopted for that review. So first of all, engagement with our multi-agency partners, and that took place in March. We had a debrief with them, then engagement with elected members and stakeholder groups at the end of March, and it has always been our intention to engage with those affected, those members of the public and businesses affected by the flooding, to seek their views and to involve them in the review process. And my colleague Gary is leading in that, and we'll cover that later, no doubt, in questions also. Flood forecasting is a key next step for us here. I mentioned already that we have a strong platform of community resilience groups, so to provide them with further and better information around flood forecasting will be a vital next step, and that will leave us well placed here to try and manage flood risk as well as we can. Finally, Chair, maybe to conclude, flood risk and climate change are linked, and obviously an increasing focus for us. It drives a lot of our activities. We have flood maps. Those flood maps show present day floodplains. They also show climate change floodplains. We take climate change into account whenever we're developing a flood alleviation project, and we're currently reviewing our technical guidance in terms of the allowances that we need to make for climate change. Looking to the future, there will be an increasing need to use SUDs, particularly soft SUDs, and by SUDs I mean, as you may know, sustainable urban drainage systems, and it'll be important that there's a proper legislative framework put in place for that, and a proper approval board, so that we manage and control the use of soft SUDs into the future. There'll be a further need for integrated modelling, and that'll be working with not only our own modelling teams but also partners in Northern Ireland Water as well. So there's an integrated approach to modelling in some areas of combined flood risk. And then communications is key in around flood risk. So important to communicate areas of risk, but it's also important to communicate what we in government can do to manage that risk, and what we can't do, and what society needs to do then in terms of how that we can support them to overall manage the risk from flooding here. So that's a very quick overview, Chair, conscious of time.
Thank you, Jonathan, we appreciate that. Just in relation to, you said there, just to start off, in terms of rivers and the responsibility that yourselves have there, you don't have statutory responsibility for water quality, water recreation, coastal erosion issues. Would it be easier if you did have statutory responsibilities for those, because some of those sit with other departments? So how does that hamper perhaps some of the work and the ability for yourselves to do some stuff around some of those issues?
It doesn't really hamper our work to manage flood risk. Water quality issues, obviously, the Northern Ireland Environment Agency and colleagues in DERA have a strong focus there, but we have good links with them. So as we would be developing our projects, we would be obviously taking into account environmental considerations, and we'll be liaising with our colleagues if there were opportunities to improve water quality as part of our works. Those links are well established. We can do that. but it doesn't really hamper or hinder us from the management of flood risk. Coastal erosion, coastal flood risk here is our focus. Coastal erosion doesn't necessarily always cause coastal flooding. I think that's something that's perhaps misunderstood in some cases. And we enjoy quite a hard coastline here as well, so it's an issue that needs to be focused upon. But again, it's not one that would hinder us from doing what we need to do in the management of flood risk, particularly from the sea.
Okay. In terms of we in the last briefing we heard about 45 properties were at risk. That was on the 6th of March of flooding. The committee had asked for a breakdown just in relation to where those properties were, where they were concentrated in terms of council area and that type of thing. So we haven't just seen a breakdown in relation to that yet. So it'd been useful if you could provide that to the committee, because it would be useful to see how that correlates with flood modelling and management plans and everything like that as well, in terms of where those properties sit. In terms of climate change, you said there about 14,800 properties at risk. Is that areas that haven't flooded yet but are maybe projected to flood in terms of climate change?
No, it's more complex than that actually. So we develop flood maps which show where we believe the present day flood risk is, and that's largely based by computer modelling, assuming a flow in a particular watercourse, and then where does that flow go whenever it rises to a particular height, and what land becomes flooded. When you're starting to model then for climate change, you would increase that flow, so that would increase the volume of water in the river, which then would increase the area of land that possibly could flood. So it's a predictive modelling technique. Those areas which have been identified as being in the climate change floodplain, some of those areas may already have flooded because there could have been a flow in a watercourse which is actually greater than the understood present day risk, and therefore the area of land flooded has been greater even than the present day outline. So it's a slightly more complex picture than just to say a climate change area has not yet flooded, but obviously the correlation would be a climate change floodplain would be more at risk. A present day floodplain would be more at risk than a climate change one in a normal scenario.
Okay. And then just, I suppose, following on from where those 45,000, in terms of your regional community resilience groups, they're across 40 communities here in Northern Ireland. Again, it'd be good to see where those resilience groups are, obviously on the back of those 45,000 properties. But what is the criteria for those groups setting up? Because, in the likes of my own area, there will be flooding from time to time in places. So what is the criteria for establishing such groups as that?
So to establish a community resilience group, what we've focused on really is there a known flood risk? Has it flooded in the past? Is there an appetite in the area for the establishment of a community resilience group? And sometimes in the past we have made contact with elected members, and they have taken that leadership role in the community, which has been really good. And then we've built on that, providing them with information to develop their community plans, maybe a text alert system so that they can be warned when river levels are getting particularly high, and remote sandbag storage. So there is a broad process there that allows us to work out where we should be engaging. We've also identified areas of risk and ourselves proactively tried to establish a group, so we haven't just waited on when a community would come to us, and we've rolled that out as best as resources would allow. We have in around 40 community resilience groups at present, and they're working well to varying extents. They are community groups. They'll have their own focus, they'll have their own priorities, and we work with them so that their individuality isn't in any way compromised, but we still support them to help manage flood risk where we can. Okay,
and then obviously yourselves are statutory consultee in relation to the planning process. Can you outline what your current time frames are on providing evidence to planning authorities?
Yes, so we would reply within 15 working days of the planning consultation being received. Now, the unit that deals with that workload isn't fully staffed as yet. So sometimes we're experiencing delays, but we're aiming for a 15-day response time.
So you're aiming for 15 days. Are you meeting 15 days? Even though you're talking there, you're understaffed. So your aim is 15 days, but you're not meeting 15 days.
No, we're not. We're only achieving about 60%. Of that target of a 15 calendar days. We're only meeting about 60% of that target.
So what would be your your longest sort of waiting times? Have you an indication of what you're looking at in terms of some of that?
Depends on the complexity of the consultation. So some of them could be a number of months, and that might be because the application we have received has incomplete information, and then we reply and seeking more information and more clarity. But some of them could be a number of months. But as I say, our ability to improve that performance would be directly proportional to the staff that we would have in the unit and the number of staff that can respond.
And how understaffed are you in that unit?
About 30% of the structure is vacant.
And what does that look like in terms of numbers?
I think it's 12 vacancies.
Okay. And then what recourse then, obviously flood risk for properties and, development in terms of planning is really, really important for people and homeowners. So what recourse does DFI have if planning permission is granted against its advice on an area that it considers to be at risk?
The decision ultimately to grant planning approval rests with the planning authorities. We provide our advice, but their decision is theirs to make, and all we can do is provide advice.
Okay, and then just lastly from myself is just in relation to the water, flooding and drainage bill. You'll be aware of that. So will DFI Rivers have any additional powers or statutory duties as a consequence of that bill? And also what level of engagement has there been between river directorates and DFI colleagues on the development of that bill?
We have very strong links with the Water and Drainage Policy Division within the group. So the Water and Drainage Policy Division group sits within the one group. We work very closely with them. We were involved in the development of the bill. The development of the bill allows for us to have substantive powers in relation to a homeowner flood protection grant scheme. So that's good. The present scheme utilises experimental powers under the drainage order. So to have the substantive powers there to develop a grant scheme is a good thing for us.
So you've very close links there, but have you had a lot of engagement in terms of this bill and development of it? Do you feel that there has been enough feed through from yourselves and you're sufficient with that?
Oh yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay, I'm going to move to Deputy Chair.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks very much for coming today and for your answers so far. The Chair's covered a lot of the key points there, but I just want to touch on two areas if I may. First is the Homeowner Flood Protection Scheme. Can you just outline what sort of budget lines in there at the minute in terms of accessible funding and how many people have applied and been successful? Well, how many people have applied and how many people have been successful in the past year on that scheme?
I think my colleague Gary answered that.
Thank you. Yes, I have the figures here. Just if you don't mind, yes, sorry. Yes, well, I suppose to date we've spent about just over £1 million on the Homeowner Flood Protection Grant Scheme, and that has facilitated those works to 140 homes. I can provide you this in a table if you like, if it's much handier.
If you want to send
Yes.
the specifics in written form, that would be good.
In total, we have had 200 applications up to this point in time, the value of which will take us to about £1.6 million worth.
And so the total budget you have lying on that's 1 million, did you say? Or you've had applications to 1 million?
We've had applications to 1.6 million.
So what can you extend to in the worst case scenario?
I don't have those figures at hand.
Okay, if you could maybe provide those,
Yeah.
that would be useful. In terms of the criteria, is the criteria the same for those that are affected by river flooding as those affected by coastal flooding?
Yes.
Could you just outline that for me?
The criteria, I suppose, it's if a home has been flooded within within the 25-year period, plus if that house is situated within our area of flood maps, that's attributed to a 1 in 25 year flood event.
Okay. Not to be parochial, Chair, but I represent East Antrim, and many people in Carrickfergus, for example, have been affected by the rising tides along there. Some have been successful, and subsequent neighbours have not. Some of those neighbours who have not been successful feel that they've actually been flooded as a direct result of the flood gates being put in to neighbours who were successful and have subsequently been flooded, but then have been turned down. Is that something that you're aware of, and is that something that happens often, or?
No, sorry. Our understanding, I suppose, really the feedback from the protection scheme has been good. Certainly in the more recent events, if you look at the northwest and particularly Eglinton and Drumahoe, some of those measures have been very effective. Okay. Albeit there are lessons still to be learned in it. It was an experimental scheme, as Jonathan has outlined, and it's certainly something that we're looking at post the flood review event, because we recognise that there have been an increase in applications, I suppose, over recent months. Okay. And because of that increase in applications, we now want to have a look at the governance, I suppose, in the eligibility criteria again, because of that increase.
Yeah, I think those who were able to avail of it, it's been successful for them. It's those who were not able to avail of it feel that they've maybe missed out on an opportunity and been affected as a direct result of that. But maybe contact you directly regarding
absolutely. If there's some specific examples we can take on board.
Okay, and if you can provide those figures just in terms of what the top level of applications, because I suppose going forward with the evidence provided today, John, that we're maybe likely to see more and more applications going forward. So that's maybe a budget line specifically within the department that might need to grow in order to take up the demand for this going forward.
Yes, we've seen a sharp uptake on applications since last autumn. Yeah.
Okay. Just the final point, Chair, for me, is on the flood and forecasting services. If you could just outline what that entails in terms of preparation for that and setting the flood and forecasting services up. It does say in the report that similar jurisdictions have spent 3 to 5 years doing that, and that's indicative of what might take for the department. Could you just outline why it takes 3 to 5 years and what that would entail?
Yes, it's a very detailed and complex area of work, and you've maybe heard this about hydrology and rivers before, but sorry. So at the moment, I suppose the evolution of where rivers have got to really has been a drainage authority. We've moved into a flood risk authority, I suppose, in more recent times. And because of that, I suppose the information that we have is pretty much geared up towards just knowing what our rivers are doing, maybe not so much in the forecasting piece and the predictive piece. So we need more people for a flood forecasting centre. We need a home for a flood forecasting centre. We need more data for a flood forecasting centre. So that looks like more hydrometric information. We need more specialist meteorological information. So if you like, we need to look up and we need to look down as well. And we need to pull that all together. In our experiences, we've had site visits to SPPS in Scotland. We've had a look in December 2022. We've also been to Met Éireann in March this year to have a look. And basically, it takes a long time to pull that data together in a meaningful way that provides you with accurate, timely and predictable information. As well as that, the communication needs to be right. You need to get the communication right to the public, and you need to have the ability to communicate it in a way that's effective to their communities. What you will see, if I could maybe relate to 2 different flood type scenarios, you've got the thunderstorm type activity, which you'll have seen over the weekend, much harder to predict, and it can happen quite quickly. So you need very, very quick and robust information at hand to be able to give out to the public. You'll have the events of autumn last year, which is a longer type event where you had heavily saturated ground and have heavy rainfall falling out over areas that we were aware of, but not to the level that we could have predicted accurately. So in those 2 different scenarios, there's different types of information that you would need. So the building of all that takes time. And that has been the experience elsewhere. We would like to get to a basic model. You know, we do provide weather information at the moment. We do have that for situational reports, if you like. So whenever we are sitting in the middle of strategic command, or whether it be tactical command within rivers during the flooding event, we were pulling together information in terms of what was happening in Newcastle, what was happening in Downpatrick, what was happening in Uri. So we do have some of that information, but we need to refine it. And there is a large data piece in and around that, an information piece, and the people as well. These are specialists that we need.
Okay, thanks, Gary. And just in terms of that, I mean, you mentioned Scotland. I think the Republic of Ireland there, are they areas or other areas that you look at as models of best practice that we can try and replicate in terms of what's worked well for them and learn from their mistakes? And I suppose that's one of the benefits of coming later to the party in respect of how you do things, that you can see what's worked well elsewhere.
Absolutely, and we're taking the lead, and the Met Erin system is very similar to that in SEPA in Scotland, and so we're hoping to shortcut some of those sort of timeframes, but we can't be specific or we can't give you an exact timeline on that. But what we would like to see, we are ambitious around this piece. Yes, we'd like to move as fast, but there are budget constraints. We haven't actually been given a budget yet to move the flood forecasting centre forward.
Okay. Thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Keith?
Okay, thanks, Chair. Thanks, gentlemen, for coming along. I have a couple of questions, and John touched on it. The homeowners protection scheme, I touched on this maybe before, if you recall, with respect to that scheme only covers money to the physical structure of the building, as in the house. Why can you not open that up to the backyard? I'm using an example in rural areas where flooding maybe creeps up fields from rivers, and the homeowner didn't get any support to put up like a little mound or a wall or whatever, and had to do that themselves. Why can you not open that scheme up to protect the house, but the money doesn't have to be spent on the house?
The scheme, whenever it was developed, was an experimental scheme, and it was important that the investment of public money was focused and controlled, and that's why it was focused purely on the building, because that's where the primary risk is. That scheme has run now from January 2016. We've needed the legislation that we just mentioned earlier to develop a more substantive scheme. When we would be looking at a more substantive scheme, we'd be looking at the eligibility criteria and how it's administered, and even the measures that could be encapsulated within the scheme. So your suggestion there would be something that we would consider, but as the scheme was established originally, it was...
Can you do that quickly? Can you make that decision tomorrow and say, okay, we're going to open that up, widen that? What's stopping you doing that?
There needs to be a review of the existing scheme, and that's something that we're hoping to do and complete by the end of the summer.
And what lessons have you learned? You know, if that's one example, I'm not saying it's a lesson, but is that one example? What other examples, if you were doing a review tomorrow, that would you put in place for that scheme?
The scheme is bureaucratic, and the reason why it's bureaucratic is because we have to have such diligence in around the administration of public money and grants. It was our first step into this area of work. Other jurisdictions have looked at what we do and actually consider the governance that we have around it to be something that they would desire. We will be looking to look at the scheme, not weakening the governance, but try and making it more flexible to adapt to flood risk, not just from rivers and the sea, but also surface water, and how we can then streamline the administration of it and consider all other measures that may form part of the scheme, like you're outlining there.
Okay, next point I want to talk about, and the Chair's touched on it, about planning and your responses to Council. I'm just thinking from a flood, I'm going to go a couple of different angles here. The flood maps, as in the flooding and then the climate change, possible flooding, and I've touched on this before yourself, if Council goes against that, whatever council that is, Mid-Ulster, Fermanagh, wherever, is there any comeback from an insurance company? So your advice is don't build that house there. And I've heard it in committees. It's a lovely fella, I'll go and give him the house. And the house is built in a climate floodplain. What's the comeback?
We have provided our advice. Any comeback would be for the planning authority to consider.
But is it, I don't mean this rude then, what's the point in asking you?
Because it's appropriate to ask in terms of flood risk. It's one of the material considerations,
you know, that we get all these people, oh, he needs a house built, and in 5 years he's standing or she's standing up to their knees in water. You shouldn't have let me build my house here.
We encounter that too. Whenever we respond to flooding, you know, people have built houses that are in floodplains. We are responding to it. We have provided advice.
As in not to build them.
Yes. Now, to be fair to planning authorities, in the vast majority of cases, they do take our advice on board, but they have their own considerations to make. Ours is just one material consideration that they have to weigh up. What those other factors that they consider are, we're not cited on those.
John, whenever you give that advice to Council, at that point you've given it. What they do, but you don't monitor that, obviously, I presume.
No.
You've given that, tell them that's up to them.
Correct.
Are you aware of any, if you were guesstimating a percentage that they go overrule your advice, what would that be?
I couldn't guesstimate, but it would be small numbers, I would imagine.
Why should they be doing any? Why should they be overruling your advice? Unless, with respect, your advice is wrong, and I'm not saying it is, but why should they be overruling your advice of any? What's the point in asking if you don't take your advice?
that's a planning matter that I'm not cited on their decision
So,
making.
we're going to have another session after this regarding a validation checklist, okay, with respect to, you know, planners reaching out to you. And you talked about a bit of to and fro. Is there much to and fro between planners as in council and yourselves getting more information? That game of tennis that you're in the middle of? Because all we see whenever people go on about planning is consultation out, response back, whatever time later, back again, more information. It just goes on and on and on. So the validation checklist, have you fed into that, or, you know, have you used a validation checklist from yourselves to council, that information you need?
We have communicated what we need, and we want to actually make further strides on that and putting up on our webpage validation checklists, so that if somebody wants to submit a planning application and they themselves know that it's going to possibly be affected by flood risk, that they understand the information that we want from them, because we think that's a way that we can streamline the process and help to get the information that we need right first time. Now, some developers and agents are very good. They've worked with us for many years. They understand the process. Some less so. So we're doing our best to try and explore what we can do to reduce the information gaps.
So, if an insurance company, if a house was passed tomorrow, for example, in Mid-Ulster, and you said, no, don't pass that, that's a floodplain, or it's a possible climate floodplain, that house was built and it flooded, and an insurance company discovered you shouldn't have built that, the advice to council was not to build that or not to pass that, who does the insurance company go after?
We have provided our advice.
So they go after council?
I'm not sure who they would go after, but we have provided our advice.
So what can you do as, and I'm nearly done, Chair, what can you do as DFI Rivers to say to councils, our advice is this, on your head be it, in better language than that? What can you do to say to councils, because they're not listening? I watched and I couldn't believe it. The guy's a lovely fella, he needs a house, but he's building a floodplain. What kind of planning is that?
As I say, that's a matter that the planners would need to address.
What can you do as DFI Rivers to say you need to listen to our advice?
All we can do is what we are currently doing, which is give our advice, and then whenever we're engaging with them, explain to them the consequences of flood risk, and that's something that would take place on some cases. And then if there's ever any strategic engagement with them, obviously flood risk is something that we would be highlighting.
Okay.
Yeah, I want to go one more point.
One last
question. Never said a nana. I want to talk about the Blackwater River, and we talked about this before. And with respect to you, don't deal, I understand, with navigational issues, right? But you deal with dredging. So we've been working with, and I know that our colleagues ABC, but also council, about this. If boats, and I'm an expert in boats from last week, if boats can't get
ship, but he's on the boat right now.
If boats can't get up that, okay, and we're talking small boats here, you don't need a lot of water for small boats. Water can't get up it. So is there a problem with the Blackwater as in flow of water getting into Lough Neagh? Irrespective of navigational issues, I'm talking about purely volume of water to prevent flooding or the possibility of flooding.
James and Gary will add more detail, but generally when you have a large river going into a loch, you'll have a thing develop which is called a sandbar, and that can impede a boat getting up the river. That doesn't mean though that river can't convey the flows that it needs to convey out into the loch, because as a storm would arrive and the river level rises, the top water level of the river will rise above the sandbar, and so the water will actually push out over the top of it. And
I can't get my head around that. I'm not saying you're wrong, but I understand what your point is, but I just can't get my head around that. If there's a blockage, it has to create a restriction.
It only creates a restriction when you're dealing with normal flows and normal land drainage issues in the very close locality of where the sandbar is. In terms of a raised flow as part of a flood, it wouldn't have any significant impact on the overall flooding associated with that river. So
how do we, on the last point, how do we solve this problem with the river Blackwater? Because last week we brought it up with Waterways Ireland, and no doubt other colleagues have communicated with DFI Rivers in this in the past. You're probably aware of the issue. How do we solve that? Because I feel like the net between McEnroe and whatever other player he's playing, it's just the ball's going to the top of my head every time, and we're not getting no solution.
You can't be serious.
Record that in the net.
You know, so how do we solve this? Yes, people's going to say it's a river, and I don't mean this cheeky, it's a river, it's your problem.
It's a river, it's a natural system, and the water that's coming down the Blackwater, I'm not sure exactly, probably pushing about 20 tonnes a second out there, out into the loch. And as that river comes down in that narrow channel and it reaches that wider expanse of water, it broadens out, speed slows down, material drops out as it settles, forms that sort of sandbar over a wider area. As the drainage authority, it's the flooding that we're mindful of. It's the flooding that our eye goes to. It's a protection of property. It's a protection of people from that. Blackwater can push a lot in front of it, and it does. There is also close where the Blackwater goes into Lough Neagh, there's a little cut called the Macri Canal.
Yes, right, yeah.
It's a little narrow cut, a few hundred metres long. It almost off to the side, really.
Yeah.
And where that Blackwater spills out and spreads out, creates this effect going into Lough Neagh. That has been used as navigation for a long time. Whenever I look at maps back to 1830, 1840, it's on there. And it has been there that entire time. This natural system exists. It'll push through whenever the water's coming down, whenever the moor's coming down that needs to go through it. And as I said, as a drainage authority, our resource and our priority goes to flood risk management and preservation of life and property from flooding. On the dredging's coming up as a question there, and it's coming up as another question as well. It's maybe, and as I said, it's a natural system. The river is a natural system. We monitor it, we mind it, we take care of where there are blockages, where it might back up. So we do maintenance where we remove blockages which could be impeding flow in that river. Dredging's a different thing. Dredging's a much more invasive thing. Dredging is excavation of a portion of the riverbed and taking that out, and that'll fill pretty quickly. Whenever that, it's the top water level that's the concern. It's not necessarily the bottom water level in the river that's a concern. It doesn't necessarily create much or any flood capacity by digging a hole locally in the bottom of a river. The river will restore its equilibrium. It'll find its way back in again. It'll find the level that it needs to be for the floodplain that it has. The river breathes out in times of flood and it breathes back in again, and that channel is a channel that has been created naturally by the river and the processes that are going on in it. Dredging is just a point to mention. Maybe dredging is not the solution that maybe some people think that it is. By excavating that, and also maybe just a point to note as well that the advantages can be limited, but it also needs to be considered in the context of other environmental impacts and environmental regulations. So there are other impacts associated with that. So the Blackwater pushes out into Lough Neagh. Lough Neagh is a big, drains maybe 43% of Northern Ireland. It's like a big bath with one plug and about 6 taps, and they're all coming in, and sperms and all of that. It's sand, glacial deposits. There's a large sediment load on a number of those rivers, bringing sands and gravels down in there to Lough Neagh and onwards, Lower Ban, the 30 miles to the coast of Coleraine.
Okay.
It's not a question. It's not a question, Chair.
We will have to move on those as well, but very quickly.
Lough Neagh, you talk about preservation of life, but Lough Neagh Rescue can't get down that river. Leave it there.
Okay, Cahill.
I don't know where to start. I've never heard tennis equated to Lough Neagh and Blackwater before, but anyway, we'll go with that. And Keith, thanks for the entertainment and that.
You can keep it you wish.
I'll come back to the river stuff. The 3 points. I mean, it's part of your presentation. See, in terms of updating the climate change technical guidance, can you give a wee update on what you mean by that? The other 2 points is maybe we update on URI. I know they're carrying out a survey there, and I just want to see when that's going to report back. And the other point then, and I see here as one of your strategies, 6-year strategy, adaptability and outward-looking engagement. Can you elaborate a wee bit on that as well, please? Thank you.
Okay, I'll answer your question in terms of the guidance and the adaptability and the Newry Flood Alleviation Scheme, and then my colleague Gary will cover the wider review into the flooding, which will also look at Newry.
Thank you.
So the climate change guidance is what we would use whenever we are designing a project or developing our flood maps as to what scenarios we should consider, what emission standard or what emission scenarios we should consider is appropriate to make the assessment of what the climate change flows would be, and then ultimately what the climate change flood maps should be. The current guidance that we have is based on 09 projections. There were more recent projections produced in 2018, and the department, our policy colleagues, the policy division that we mentioned earlier, are working through that piece of work to determine what's the best options for us to consider here to make sure that our maps are as accurate as they can be and our flood alleviation projects are designed in the right way. It's a complex piece.
Yeah.
Climate change has got some scenarios which are quite broad in their range, and so it's important that we make the right choices here based on what other jurisdictions are doing, but also what's particularly unique to ourselves. So that work's ongoing, and I would suspect that as that gets more clarity, that'll be something that the committee would have an interest in. In terms then of the 6-year strategy and the adaptability and outward looking, I was actually struck by your comment the last time we were here about the danger of silo working. Rivers is a small organisation, if you like. When you consider some of the other organisations like our roads colleagues or Northern Ireland Water, we're smaller. But we've been given big responsibilities in the management of flood risk, and about 10 years ago we recognised we can't do this on our own.
Yeah.
We need to collaborate with others. We need to build strong policies and links with planning authorities and do our best from our point of view. We need to work with councils. We need to work with the voluntary sector like the Red Cross to develop good plans to respond to flooding, and we've done that. And we need to make sure that our delivery teams don't just, for want of a better expression, pick up the manual, follow the manual, and that's it. That we're alive to what's going on with our colleagues in the Republic through the Office of Public Works, that we know what's going on in England, Scotland and Wales and even in Europe. The Floods Directive, as you know, was a European Floods Directive, and we had good links with some European counterparts there. That's because it is our view that the management of flood risk requires in-house expertise. So if we're bringing consultants on board, it's largely to add capacity rather than capability. And for us then to be the intelligent client, we need to be adaptable to integrate with others, and I've outlined some of the organisations that we integrate with, but they were also outward looking, and the flood forecasting piece is a good example where we're not knocking the doors of people for the first time here on this. We have got long-standing relationships which are now able to call upon, and the flood forecasting piece of work here, supposed to manage the expectation around it. It won't be that we'll be able to forecast every flood on every river everywhere. No flood forecasting system can do that, but it'll be something that'll be very useful here, because unlike other jurisdictions, we developed the community resilience platform first, so that our outward looking piece here was to have an informed user base for a flood forecasting system, whenever it then would become something that we would be able to develop. Okay, so those are some of the examples where we think we have broken down the walls of the silos. Your third question then was in around Newry. Gary will cover the review. In terms of the flood alleviation project, that's 3 phases. Phase 1 is the Greenbank Industrial Estate, that's complete. Phase 2 is building flood walls or enhancing the flood walls that currently run through the centre of Newry itself. We've really good links with the council there, and they're taking forward a public realm scheme, and there's an opportunity for us to integrate what we want to do with their public realm scheme in around the town hall, and we're working through that to try and accelerate that element of the flood wall piece of work. The remaining portions of the flood wall project, which is stage 2, is going through then the business case development for the other elements, and then phase 3 is upland storage, and that's something that we're going to face increasingly here in our towns and cities, that we can't build our way out of flood risk, in terms of managing flood risk. We're going to have to learn how to store water, and I'm not talking about ponds and pools the size of this room. I'm talking about substantive storage areas, and that's what phase 3 will look like, and that'll be a challenging, more long-term piece, but we've got that vision to tackle that now, so that we're managing the risk in Newry into the future.
And the survey.
Yes,
yeah,
and
yeah.
then on the flood review, folks, I suppose, Chair, we I suppose promised this committee a few months back that we would deliver on a flood review by summer, and we're on track to do that, so thankfully it's progressing very well. The last piece of the jigsaw really will see an open day on the 25th, 26th, 27th of June in Portadown, then Downpatrick, and then Newry. And that's open to elected representatives and the public alike, and that will be communicated out through both DFI and other partner organisations. The flooding review is a joint piece. It was a joint piece between the Executive Office, DFI and local government. We've been running regular review meetings on that. And previous to the open day, we have had stakeholder engagement sessions where we brought together people in those affected communities in those locations at leisure centres in the very towns that were flooded. So that was a very good thing and very good feedback from that. That will feed into the report. The report basically is founded around two drivers that was contained within the terms of reference. And the two drivers are really a British standard that determines a post-flood risk assessment approach. So that looks at the causation factors, the advice been given from the Met Office, hydrological issues, and I suppose flooding infrastructure that exists within each of those towns. As you know, it was a very widespread event. The flooding in Downpatrick differed from that in Newry and differed from that in Portadown, so there's different factors at play there. The other element to the report is that we need to look towards a civil contingencies framework for Northern Ireland in the sense that we prepare, we respond, and then we recover from any emergency. So the report will be built along and guided along that sort of strategy, if you like. So we will look at the preparation, what information did we have, how did the multi-agency partners come together, how did we respond, and then the last piece is the recovery piece, where it looks at the financial assistance that was offered, how the towns of Downpatrick and Newry were recovered, in a sense, how the businesses then recovered from that. So it's more in around the financial and the recovery piece as opposed to what we done from a DFI perspective. So it would be more local government, perhaps, and Department of Finance. But that gives you a flavour. It will be a very detailed report, and we hope to present it to committee, as I say, early summer.
Just a wee final point, because it's important. I know, John, you said you've responded to all the LDPs. I take it you'll play a part in all the local development plans. The issue for me, and to be fair to Keith, I mean, you can't interfere. You only respond as a statutory consultee, and we don't want to take away, the autonomy of councils to make the decisions. But it just springs to mind. We brought a PPS 15, I think it is, planning and flood risk policy about 10 years ago. I'm a point to you probably, and you can answer it if you wish. Is it robust enough, or in your opinion, is that plan and policy statement robust enough when they come to making these decisions? If you want to comment on grand enough, but that's the one they're using at the minute. They may have reviewed parts of it, but that's initially that was it.
We're feeding into the local development plan process,
Yeah.
and as the planning authorities work through their plan policies, clearly PPS 15 has served us well in terms of a policy that gives us a framework whereby we can respond, and it gives then those necessary policy levers for a planning authority to use. And so, because it is robust, our view is that we would like to see those replicated in the local development plans as much as possible. So we're feeding into the process. We think existing policy is robust, but I can't answer the questions which Keith was presenting here around the application of policy, and it's not to be evasive, but I just can't, Keith.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
Okay.
You're very welcome. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you.
Chair.
Peter?
Thank you, everyone, for coming in. Jonathan, good to see you again as well. Just to loosely touch on what John was saying earlier, and what everyone's been talking about in terms of the flood forecasting system, you'd mentioned there about silo approaches. Can you tell us about, is DFI working with other departments to try to finance this? I think I raised this in the last committee as well, that it can't just be left up to yourselves, as you say, to introduce something like this. And I think there's benefits for the other departments as well. So is that cross-departmental approach being taken to try to introduce this as quickly as possible?
Our initial piece of work here is to work out some more detail on what we need to do, and we have made requests for the finance to do that through our own departmental budgetary process. I think as we develop through it, we'll see more clearly if there are other opportunities for engagement with partner departments or partner organisations for funding. But Gary, you may have some more detail on that.
Yeah, there's some elements when we move forward that will be transformational, particularly around the digital piece. So I think we can look toward budgets elsewhere for that. For instance, because not only for the Flood Forecasting Centre, but there's other elements. So we talk about adaptability for rivers. We make use of a lot of GIS technology. We make use of a lot of new modern handheld technology for our field operatives. So in around that piece, we would certainly go looking for money in that invest to save area.
Jonathan, you had said it's an important next step. I mean, when are we going to try to aim for that important next step to be taken? There'll be plenty more after that as well, as you just said, Gary, in terms of how to deliver that. So I mean, 3 to 5 years to deliver something like this.
Yeah.
But is that going to happen? It's not going to happen this year, I would imagine. Although I'm always optimistic. Is it going to be next year, year after that? When are we kind of aiming for this?
I have said that we're very ambitious around this space. We've employed Jacobs as our consultant who are leading on the flooding review, and Jacobs, they sit in a special scientific advisory group. And they're very much specialists in this field, and they have reaches within SEPA, they have reaches within the Environment Agency within England, and they have good contacts within Met Éireann and OPW in the Republic. So I think we're doing what we can around this space, Peter, and we are very ambitious around it. We'll certainly put forward a business case that will bring forward a flood forecasting system as quickly as possible for here. That's what we would like to do, absolutely.
I think it's maybe important just to flag that other jurisdictions have developed flood forecasting capability ahead of ourselves, but the community resilience network that uses it hasn't been as regionally focused as it has been here. And our view was, rather than just producing more and more information, which the public might not know how to use or how to react to it whenever they receive it, we wanted to have a good base of understanding amongst affected communities what to do with this information when you get it. It's one thing to be told you're going to flood, or that there's a flood alert in your area, but what do you do about it? And that's why the community resilience platform was important. So we are hopeful that will allow greater traction with whatever product we're able to produce in whatever time frame for fairly quickly.
Just while you're saying that, so you'll have data to communicate to people. How does that look like in other jurisdictions? If someone turns around to me and gives me very scientific information, how do you make that digestible for the public to be able to understand what they're receiving? Is it highly technical, or is there a way for the department to make sure that that's digestible for the public?
No, it needs to be something that's easily understood, or the whole purpose of it all falls down. Yeah. So other jurisdictions have what's called flood alerts and flood warnings. We quite like the approach that the Met Office have used here, which is the coloured shape on a map which says that this is the area that's most of concern. But Gary,
I just want to come in. James would sit on a group, the Public Weather Services group, and there's a whole behavioural science around this, Peter, in terms of how you get that message out. It's a bit like traffic signs. You see them every day, but you get used to them, and therefore you start ignoring them perhaps. So it's important to get the right messages out to the right people in the right way. So we're well aware of that, and our ears and eyes are open in that regard.
Okay, all right. Stephen?
Thanks, Chair, and thanks, gentlemen, for your time today. Just a couple of quick points. You mentioned the Belfast tidal flood alleviation scheme, and obviously we'll welcome that. It would just be keen to know, it mentions in your report that it is due for completion in the autumn of 24, which is approaching reasonably quickly. Is that still the plan? Are you confident in that?
Yes, with reasonable confidence that that's going to be achieved.
Good. And then just tying on to the back of that, and it may link into the answer on this particular point, just looking at the flood maps, the interactive website, which is very good, and it is good that anybody can use it and access it. In terms of within my own constituency, North Down, there's a number of areas not that far from here, including Kinniger is probably the most alarming when you look at it, that the number of properties that are at risk, in low-lying areas, and then extending right through into Donaghadee Harbour. You may be aware as well, some discussion around that recently. But I suppose just, to tap into that, what plans are there to reduce, the risk of flooding? Obviously that's on the present day thing, even not including the climate change, when the colours get even darker in those particular areas. And And tying in with the Belfast scheme, you know, how far up Belfast Lock will that, you know, does that stop?
It runs really. So there's a number of questions there, I suppose.
Yeah, thanks.
So in terms of the Belfast tidal scheme, it runs from the harbour estate right up to Stranmillis. So it's quite a long footprint.
Doesn't cover the Kinnegard section then, really?
No,
Yeah.
no. Now we do have a capital works programme, over 60 projects on that programme, and it's about, in broad terms, about 300 million in value. And there are a number of areas. You know, Bangor, for example, is a significant flood risk area,
Yeah.
and that's part of the considerations there. Our ability to proceed with studies to even determine is there a risk that needs managed, and is there a viable approach to managing that? That takes a fair bit of time, but we're working through that as far as the budget allows us to.
Well, I appreciate that, and it's not going to be sold overnight, certainly, and there's obviously significant costs as well. Just a final question, touching back to the planning applications. We're all familiar with the processes and the frustrations from the public as well, and you know, applicants and agents and so on. And I know you know, you're not the only statutory consultee with maybe not meeting targets as much as you would like to, but what plans have you, you know, to ultimately improve response times? I know you talked about staff shortages. Is that things that you're looking at, recruitment and so on? Is there measures in place to try and improve that?
Rivers used to have an excellent track record of responding to planning consultations on time. And then from about 2019, because of the volume of planning consultations increasing so much, our performance started to slip, and we developed plans to augment and enhance the size of the planning advisory unit. And that enhancement of the unit took place, but people retire. There are difficulties attracting civil engineers and flood risk experts into the industry, particularly into government. And we're working through more recently some novel approaches as to how we can bring in expertise from different disciplines to help build up that unit. It'll be budget dependent, of course, but we're working through exploring, even if we had the budget, how do we get the people? So we're very aware of the need to augment that unit where we can, because as I've said in my opening remarks, it's a key part of the work that we do.
Yeah, I know colleagues within the department in other areas have talked about the challenges of the public sector as well against the private sector, you know, in recruitment. I'm sure you're experiencing that too in engineering and so on.
We do
Yeah.
We do indeed.
Thanks, gentlemen. Thanks.
Thank you, Danny, and then I'm going to Mark.
Thanks, Chair. Most of the points have been answered anyway, so I just want to make a wee small point on resilient communities then, because while I represent an area which wouldn't be seen as a flood risk by any stretch of the imagination, a very simple thing that we done a number of years ago because of climate change and extreme weathers that we get, which comes from a storm just out of the blue, and a number of homes in different areas would have got particularly badly flooded, was a simple container that's filled with sandbags now, so the community can just access it when these events take place. So it's really important that all communities are prepared for it, even if they're not seen to be like in Downpatrick or Newry when you have massive events. But something as simple as that protects a home, and you know that life damage that ends up happening to them as an individual. Where just during that last summer, like, a house just facing me was the only house that was in any danger of a flood, just the way the water was coming down the road. It was just insane water that came within minutes. It wasn't even hours, it was just minutes of torrential rain. So resilient communities is going to be so important going forward, and then that approach with stakeholders. I know you mentioned about the review. That's going to be so important, because as a former councillor in Belfast, like, I have to give them praise and yourselves for the quick response when these events take place in our community. So just that wee point.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mark.
Thank you, Chair. A lot of the questions were taken, but don't worry, I'll scrap around. I'm sure I'll take a couple now.
Mark.
Just following on from Danny's, I was wondering, is there like a policy, a set policy around the provision of sandbags to communities? I know, like, say in the Eglinton area, for example, there is a container. I mean, there's a resilience group that has been set up there, but when the storm warnings come, and they are coming with an increased frequency, I mean, my phone is hot from areas that have been flooded before that wouldn't enjoy that provision, and these bags of sand become like bags of gold dust really do know there was a huge demand for them. So I just wondered, is there a policy or a criteria on which they are deployed? I'll run through the questions, maybe sure it might be quicker. Chair, I wonder what relationship you have, and there's been talk of the need for cross-departmental work, and that's fairly obvious, but with the Civil Contingencies Policy Branch in the Executive Office, what relationship there has been maybe historically and currently, because we've learned through the course of this COVID inquiry how under-resourced they have become, or that policy branch itself. I know historically departments would have been maybe top sliced, or budgets would have been top sliced, and every department would have contributed to that, but as budgets have become constrained across departments, they haven't been maybe willing or able to put money away, literally in this instance, for a rainy day. I wonder how that impacts, I suppose, you in terms of flood response. On the flood protection grant scheme, I think it raised it before, and if there's a review of that being carried out, I'd like to see some sort of provision for social housing landlords or engagement with them. They haven't really engaged in my own constituency, or my former constituency. Eglinton's been taken away now, because they're again, it's about protecting people, protecting property, but it'll also ultimately protect the public purse in that instance. That'll do for now. Thank you.
Okay. I can maybe answer some of these, and then Gary can come in. In terms of sandbag provision in areas of flood risk, we welcome any opportunity to get sandbags to areas of flood risk. It helps the community. It helps us in a response to a flooding event if a community can help themselves. So if there are communities out there who think that would be useful for them, by all means we're very open to that. In terms of the relationship with the Civil Contingencies Policy Branch, we've long links with them. Before I fulfilled the role that I'm currently in, I would have been responsible for emergency planning and would have worked very closely with CCPB colleagues in developing the lead government department arrangements. Originally, when that responsibility came to the department, I thought that meant that Rivers would have to respond to every flooding incident everywhere, and their expertise was really helpful in teasing out what the subtleties were of being a lead department. It doesn't mean that we respond to all floods everywhere, but that we have expertise in terms of flood risk, and how that we can share that with other responding organisations to make the government response as good as it can be. They've also been involved with us in terms of developing emergency response exercises, and they're also linked with us in terms of the current review, which Gary will maybe speak to. In terms of the homeowner grant scheme and then the review and the social housing aspect, the department is absolutely committed to fulfilling our obligations in the management of flood risk. Sometimes flooding occurs and there's almost a natural response, which is it must be the fault of government. And if we have lessons to learn, we'll learn them, but the reality is that flooding's occurring because there's rainfall coming at such a volume that it can't be managed in some cases. But to manage flood risk as effectively as possible, those that provide social housing, particularly those that are publicly funded to provide social housing, they need to recognise the risk to their infrastructure. In the same way that utility companies recognise the risk to their infrastructure and do what they can. So it's important that the department fulfills its role, but it's also clear where the boundaries of its role are as well. But that's something I think the review should mention, so there is clarity around that. So that's a useful prompt.
At least so the information's imparted to those social housing landlords of this site or development of yours is at risk.
Gary, do you want to feed out a bit more about the CCPB and the CCG role?
Yes. Just to offer reassurance that there are very good structures in place. I've been in this emergency response role for about 16 years now in different guises, I suppose, firstly in roads, now in rivers, and it has evolved into a very good place in my opinion. We have good structures. We meet on a regular basis, as Jonathan has alluded to. We do have mock exercises to understand not only how we coordinate from a strategic level, but also on the ground how that works. There are emergency planning groups throughout Northern Ireland. There are 3 of those. There's an east, there's a west, and east, north and west. And that will see the coming together of, led by Executive Office of Local Government and Central Government and the Blue Light organisations, Fire and Rescue and so on. If you look back at the autumn 2023 floods, we come together very, very well. I mean, we switch on very quickly in those scenarios. And I suppose in this virtual world that we live in now, it makes it more easier for us to communicate. So I would hold it up as a shining light in the way that we work. In fact, it has been held up as a shining light by other organisations across the UK whenever we come to exercise, because the fact that we are so close-knit, we're small region geographically, and funny, you meet the same people around the same tables so often, I suppose, from a strategic and a technical level, that it works quite well, because quite often it's the people that move the mountains, you know, it's not the process or the systems. So I would like to reassure the committee that that works very well, particularly in the emergency response, right across the department, and that our responsibilities are well known and exercised.
Thank you. And just finally, Chair, that does tie in obviously to the flood prevention as well, and that's ongoing maintenance. And I suppose the difference between the designated areas and non-designated, I was wondering, just in terms of oversight, what oversight powers or role do you have over those non-designated stretches? I mean, can you compel landowners to do work or not to do work? And you know, I suppose it's difficult in many of these instances to actually identify landowners as well.
The drainage order provides us with powers to do the work that we need to do on designated watercourses, and then the flood risk management plans, which are a statutory requirement, detail that watercourse maintenance is one of the key measures to manage flood risk here. There's a vast network of watercourses that are not designated, and that means that they haven't been designated by the Drainage Council to be maintained at public expense. But the drainage order does have powers within it that would allow us to take enforcement action if there was a blockage on a watercourse that wasn't designated, that was significantly affecting the flow of water in that watercourse. So we do have some abilities there to enforce and encourage riparian landowners to fulfil their obligations to maintain the watercourses.
Thank you.
Thank you. Just before you go, it would be remiss of me not to ask, considering we have the budget coming up, in terms of the flood forecasting, what was submitted as part of the 2024-2025 budget process in terms of your bids, and then for capital projects as well, what was the bid for the budget for 2024-2025? If you just briefly point to us.
Yes, I can. So, Gary, do you want to cover the flood forecasting?
The flood forecasting for this year is 350,000, and that's really just in terms of getting the people in place in order to drive that project forward. There's some technological improvements that we'd like to make over the shorter term, but it's primarily for the people to get the centre up and running. But we have a 3-year profile, as we alluded to, that will ramp up to 2 million over the 2 years, and thereafter we would need in the order of £2 million per annum to finance the flood forecasting centre.
Okay.
But our bid for this year is in and around 350. I can provide you with the exact figure, but
yeah. And then the capital, then?
Capital is 21.5 million. That's the money that we will need to take forward, what we're committed to doing this year, and we're awaiting the decision around the budget.
And is that for the 60 projects that you had outlined, or how many projects is that looking at?
That will allow us to work on the list of 60 projects. Yeah. So some of them it'll be taking them forward to construction, some of them it'll be the development of design, some of them it'll be the development of business cases. I don't have the figure to hand exactly how many of the full list will have work carried out this year, but quite a few of them will.
Okay, look, thank you very much for coming to the committee today. We appreciate your time and coming to us, and no doubt we'll probably see you again. Okay. So thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, make it easier.
Eh?
No time since they were on.
In March, isn't
It seems you don't.
Okay, members, we'll move on to the next one. Just before we do, before they come in, I was just thinking, one minute, I'll come back to you. Sorry, Cal. Just in terms of the next item of business, which is to do with the planning system, I was thinking it would be easier. You'll see outlined there the 3 areas in terms of what we want to look at. Considering this is a big area, what I was going to do was take questions in terms of review of regional strategic planning policy on renewable and low carbon energy as a first. So and then we'll move to the call for evidence on strategic planning policy statement as a next round of questions, and then the consultation on planning application validation checklist. So just to keep it a bit neater, just because this area is quite big, so I was thinking if you have questions relating to that area, we'll take it in a round if that's okay. You happy with that? Sorry, Cahill.
Just 2 points, Chair. There are some questions maybe that we didn't ask, and maybe could we make a suggestion we put them in writing to the department or and the other point is that to refer to some of the stuff that Keith brought up, not that I want to put research under any pressure. I think it wouldn't be a bad idea to try and get some information in relation to that PPS 15 was 2014-2015. Some information on the 45,000 plus 14 in terms of the decisions made in the last 10 years. Because that's why I asked about the robust policy. There was a robust policy brought in. I know they're only statutory consultees, but it'd be good to get a bit of research about those houses that have been given planning permission that has been identified in flood risk areas over the last 10 years. Because
bear in mind, there are ones that would have got planning permission in say 2017 or 18, and then they're not designated until 2021.
Could be
fair enough, because you can look at the maps yourself and you can identify the flood areas. My point is, Keith raised it there, not to take away the autonomy from councils making decisions, but now we're in a situation where we're firefighting when it comes to flood. We're out there as reps. It wouldn't be a bad idea to get some information, even if you take it 5 years out of the 40, just try and get some information from local authorities in terms of it's urban versus it's urban plus rural. You know what I mean? Those 45,000 properties. It's just our research papers.
I think it's a good piece of work to want done, but I think it's a good.
It's just a question, whatever way we format that.
It's how do you actually format it? Yeah.
I can have, I'll talk to research and see whether that is something they could deliver, though I think the first step is that they'd agreed to provide the information on the 45,000. So I think the first step would actually be getting that information from the department. That would be required, I think, before.
Well, as long as they have all the information, the data, because they said about data there, if the department has the data, they'll have data on everything they've responded to as a statutory consultee, which will be a starting point. But it's just if there's an extra piece of work for Ray's to do, I think it would be a bad idea for us to have it. Okay.
Okay, content them with that approach? Yeah. Just wait till some of that other information comes back. I think would be useful in terms of seeing how we go forward on that. Okay, members, so if you're content then we'll move on to item 8. And this is the Planning Systems Matters SPPS on climate change, regional strategic planning policy on renewable and low carbon energy, and planning application validation checklist, Department for Infrastructure oral evidence. At page 92 you'll see the clerk's memo, at page 97 you'll see written evidence, and from pages 106 to 204 there's a number of background documents that have been included in the pack for members' attention and information. So I'm seeking agreement again that the evidence is recorded by Hansard. All content? Yeah. Okay, so welcome to the committee for infrastructure today. You're very, very welcome, and we're looking forward to hearing some of your evidence today. So we're welcoming Alistair Beggs, Chief Planner and Director of Regional Planning, Policy and Casework, DFI. We're welcoming Joy Hargey, Regional Planning, Policy and Casework, DFI, Catherine McFerrin, Acting Director of Regional Planning, Governments and Legislation, DFI, and Nola Jamieson, Regional Planning, Governance and Legislation, DFI. We do have information, we've quite substantial written information, and so I'm just asking you to briefly outline, apologies in the delay in coming to you, and thank you for your patience, but I'm just asking you to briefly outline and give us some of the highlights, I suppose, and then I'll come to members' questions. All right.
Thank you very much, Chair and members. Thank you for the invitation to come to here today to talk to you about three particular topical planning matters. As you said, I'm accompanied here by my fellow director, Catherine McFerrin, and also we have Nola Jamieson from our legislation side of things and Joy Hargey from our policy side of things in the department. Now, of the first item I'd like to raise is the draft revised regional strategic planning policy on renewable and low carbon energy. That's as contained in the strategic planning policy statement. I'll refer to that as the SPPS from now on. And you're aware of the consultation that occurred last year in relation to that, which sought views on that policy. And really, the aim of that was, this review is to ensure that the regional policy is fit for purpose and up to date in relation to renewable low carbon energy. It's there to inform, it'll be there to improve and inform decision making in relation to development proposals through planning applications, and also to inform local development plans as they come through their development process. And really, it's also to take in a wider contemporary picture now, where we have the energy strategy from 2021 and of course the Climate Change Act of 2022. You'll see in your papers we've had 66 responses in relation to that from a wide range of interests, and there's a broad welcome for that intention to support the achievement, the targets of the energy strategy and the Climate Change Act. But I suppose some of the highlights, if you like, of the comments have included, people seeking clarity on the weight to be attributed to the climate emergency when we're considering relevant proposals. For example, the industry is very keen that substantial weight is given to the contribution of such development towards the targets. As opposed to that, we also have people very keen to support the environmental and amenity considerations as well. So there's a dichotomy of views there. There's also, you'll see the policy also, for example, put forward a proposal that there could be a spatial approach coming through local development plans as they come through the process. You'll see that there's been considerable concern, I think, from a number of people, and I think the view is that should be perhaps proposals should be determined more on their merits on a case-by-case basis. And we also have favourable support, and in principle it seems coming through for the favour of repowering, expanding and extending the life of existing wind and solar farms in these areas. And you'll also notice from your papers that we've had quite strong views, I think, to the proposed approach to separation distances, with views that the 10 times rotor diameter requirement is unnecessary constraint to wind energy development. So there's a lot of comments there, but really today I think we're very much welcoming this engagement because it's our opportunity to listen to you and your views, so we can feed that into matters as we now take things forward. We're very much in the final stages of our consideration as officers, and we're hoping to bring forward that policy as soon as we possibly can for the attention of the Minister. The second item, they call for evidence on the SPPS in relation to climate change. I suppose the existing planning policy statement was ahead of its time. In some ways it was very much focusing on sustainability at its heart, but there has been quite a contextual change since 2015 in relation to the wider efforts of government in addressing the climate change issues. The Climate Change Act has brought legislative requirements as well. So the question is how can we look at our policies in that and do we need to revise things to contribute to reductions of carbon emissions as we move towards a net zero path by 2050. So in that terms, it's very important, I think, to ask the question, is the SPPS is it fit for purpose and is it future-proofed to appropriately support the climate change agenda? And that was the intent really behind the call for evidence that was issued. And you'll see that we have 59 responses to that. We're in the process of going through those responses at the moment, so we really only have a sort of very high-level view of what those are saying at the moment. But there is very much, I think, a view that the policy does need to be updated, according to a lot of people, to bring climate change more centre and focus in relation to the purpose of planning and its the core planning principles in the policy document. There was a lot of mention, again, I think, of the pros and cons of renewable and low carbon energy, flood risk development in floodplains, as well as comments in relation to active travel and sustainable forms of transport and associated infrastructure. And again, there have been some reference to an ecosystems-based approach to climate action, mitigation and adaptation, and requests that weight is provided to the SPPS to support the protection of all landscapes and to safeguard human health and environment. So in relation to that, the main task for us now is to pull all those together so we can brief the Minister so he can consider the way forward in terms of whether to bring forward a review or not. The final matter which we brought to your attention today is in relation to validation checklists. You'll recall that this was a matter that was brought forward, I think, by the departmental report on the implementation of the Planning Act. It's also been referred to by the Audit Office reports and the Public Account Committee reports, as well as something that should be brought forward. The public consultation on that ended last year. And again, you'll notice from your papers that there have been 39 respondents, all of which were agreeing with the proposals that validation checklists be brought forward on that statutory footing. And there was also broad support for a review mechanism in relation to that. And that review mechanism has been discussed quite a lot with the Departmental Solicitor's Office and indeed the Planning Appeals Commission, who would be looking to provide that review if there was a dispute between councils and an applicant. So those discussions are going on, and I know there's also been quite a bit of discussion with Belfast City Council because it's had one of these validation checklists in place for a number of years now, and so we're looking to pick up on items from them. So thereafter, it's our intention to further engage with the statutory consultees and the councils on the provisions of legislation and guidance before it's finalised. I think that's all I really want to say because I'm conscious of time and I know you'll be keen to get into questions. So thank you for your patience and the opportunity to give you a broad briefing on that.
Thank you. So what I'm going to do just is I'm going to take each of those sort of three areas and we'll maybe start off just with a round of questions in relation to the review of the regional strategic plan and policy and renewable and low carbon energy, and then we'll maybe do question just to keep it easier because it's such a big topic in terms of all of those. But firstly, just on the review on the regional strategic plan and policy on renewable and low carbon energy. Obviously this is intended to inform the local development plan process, and this consultation closed in June 2023, and I'd asked the Minister why it hadn't been published yet in terms of the report, and the response said that it will be released at the same time as publishing the revised policy in its final form, which will be later this year. So really as a committee then we won't have a chance to look at the consultation report before the Minister then makes decisions around that.
So at this point I think that's what, in terms of engagement today is very important in relation to that, so we can feed your views into what's going before the Minister, and certainly time of departmental write around, we'd be looking to give yourselves a view of that report in confidence. If the committee would like to be engaged further, feels that it needs further engagement, that's something we could certainly raise with the Minister, if that would be.
Well, I think it would be, personally. I don't know how the rest of the committee would feel in relation to that, but I mean, the local development plans is something we've talked about quite a lot in this committee, and I would just be surprised that the committee wouldn't have some type of scrutiny role in relation to the consultation report, and then any ministerial final decision making in relation to that, because it's such, we have targets to meet as a government, and so I think it's important that we do have some drill down into some of this as well in relation to what the consultation report is saying. So we'd appreciate if you could take a look at that and take that back, because I wouldn't want that to be the process for other consultation reports that go out as well, that the committee wouldn't have a view in looking at it. So in terms of then, do you believe that the revised regional strategic planning policy will achieve the 80% renewable electricity consumption target by 2030? There was a target of 70, but that was then changed to 80 by the Climate Change Act. Would 70 have been more attainable? 2030 is coming pretty soon, so what would be your view?
I think they're certainly very challenging targets, Chair, and I think it's incumbent upon all of us to try and get there. And I think the role of planning and planning policy is to see how we can facilitate getting there. I think it needs to be recognised that the existing planning policy that's in place, again, is very, is a presumption really in favour of renewable energy. That took us to the 40% and over. I know that at times it depends on how much wind blows in any year, but I think we've been quite close to the 50% generation at some point. I think that's dropped back a little bit now to 45. And so I think, even under existing policy, I think there's scope to do more, but there are a lot of issues, I think, feeding into whether we can meet targets. Part of it is, us for planners to look hard at ourselves as to how we're processing things and pushing things forward in terms of application. But there are other issues that need to be addressed, such as the route to market and the subsidy and so on. I think one thing that struck us, if you're a planner, is when the last subsidy arrangement ceased, there was a fall in the number of planning applications for renewable energy coming into the system. It was quite a dramatic change. I think if that subsidy then kicks off again, we need to be ready to be able to bring that forward as planners to take through. So in terms of the policy itself, I think, improving that focus on climate change, having a full cognizance in relation to the Climate Act and its requirement will help facilitate that. But planning's part of the overall delivery. There's lots of components in there.
I think it's fair to say, though, in relation to, any feedback I have had, any discussions I have had as a local MLA, planning is a huge barrier and a huge issue in terms of, renewable energy. And for example, wind turbines, getting that across the line in terms of applications. There seems to be a lack of expertise within some of the system in terms of planning, and that's holding things back. In the written evidence to the committee, Renewables NI indicated that Northern Ireland had the longest planning timelines across these islands, with the major renewable projects taking over 3 years to receive a decision. So will the revised planning policy have a positive impact on the length of time such applications receive a decision? Because we're sitting 2024, we've got 2030 coming down the track, and we're looking at 3 years for projects to get applications. That is going to hold us back.
I mean, I think that's a fair question, Chair. We are aware of the timeline lines here, and what we would like to do is reduce those as much as we can. There's a lot of strands, again, to that. Part of that is a number of applications coming into the system. If they're not coming into the system, then they can't get out the other end. There's also, again, as planners, we do need to be fully recognising the impacts of the Climate Change Act, build that into our thinking, and certainly we do that in the department. And in that term, I think the policy will help bring that focus again to all the planning authorities involved in this. So again, that will provide an impetus. But again, planning is there to help facilitate us reaching that target. There are a number of other elements to look at in there. In terms of training and engagement, we have been trying to increase our engagement with the renewables industry of late. We have a good working relationship with them where we kind of frank conversations, and I think that's incredibly important, is that we understand each other's issues in terms of aims, what you can, what you cannot do. And I would like to keep that engagement continuing. You've mentioned in relation to training and so on, we're looking at, in particular, getting the industry and other groups and councils involved to look at a particular type of technology in relation to battery systems. Hopefully we'll be able to do that quite shortly. That's the sort of thing that we need to do to improve things. And I'm sure that the number of actions in relation to planning improvement programme, which is looking to speed things up in general, will assist as well. And we've also engagement with the statutory consultees. We know they have various issues, and sometimes in terms of resources, but it's a question of how can we cut down the workloads for them to allow them to focus perhaps on the more strategic elements of things. So there's lots going on. So yes, the policy I think will achieve, but it's only a part of the equation.
So this will be the last before I come to some members on this. But in terms of, we know that there's obviously these consultations happening. One thing, another. I've talked about the difficulties in terms of getting planning across the line and how long that takes. We have seen in other places across the world in terms of their climate targets that they're being taken to court because they're not meeting those targets. Planning is an issue in terms of the delay. Do you have a concern that as a department planning may cause an issue and therefore we will not be able to meet our climate change targets in renewable energy, and therefore we could be in a similar situation with court action by not meeting our targets?
I've been keeping an eye on some of those court cases as well. It's certainly quite interesting. I think, Chair, the important element is here is planning system isn't quite functioning as we want it to. That's why we've had the reports from the NIAO and Public Accounts Committee reports. That's why we've got that planning improvements in place, is to improve that. If we're improving that for the whole system, we will be improving it for renewable energy targets. As I said, I think those targets are tough. They will be difficult to meet, but I think we and everybody else involved has to drive forward in relation to those, and that's everybody from the applications that we're receiving in terms of quality, and there's also something to be said about they need to be the right applications in the right place, because planning is about balance. We've got to balance that requirement from the Climate Change Act along with the impact upon the environment and so on, and try to find a way through that. But we're very cognizant of those targets. We want to try to hit them, and I think that's what we're going to be aiming for that, and we'll do our best to facilitate that. And I think it's back to that point, engaging with people and having the appropriate resources in the appropriate places. I know that in terms of statutory consultees, the councils and everybody involved, you do need to have that resource in place. We will do what we can with the resource that we have.
Okay, Deputy Chair.
Thanks, Chair. Thank you very much for coming today and for the answers so far. Just to pick up on that last point the Chair was raising, first of all, about the letter from Renewables NI. I'm also aware of a number of international players who have just given up on Northern Ireland in terms of their investment because of the laborious, and one described it to me as painful, process of waiting over 4 years to invest millions of pounds in renewables because they just could not get over the line, and that is deeply concerning. We have hugely optimistic, rightly so, targets, and I think 2030, as the Chair says, is coming round the corner, and unless we quickly address the problems and barriers that major players across the world who are wanting to bring their investment to Northern Ireland, then we're going to lose out on that. So, I mean, we're 10 years in from planning powers being devolved to local councils. Are you content with the progress that's been made in terms of being able to address these optimistic targets?
I think, again, there's several points there, and the move to a two-tier system was a huge, it was a big bang. And you know, my experience was in two-tier systems before I came into a single-tier system. So to see that change around, I think, you know, everybody's done very well to get the planning system to where it is at the moment. I think there is more to be done, and that's what we've got to push on. Again, that would be in terms of resourcing. There's all sorts of things there. There's, you know, getting the appropriate resources to the right places, whether that, you know, from the start of the system to the end. And it's just, again, engaging, trying to identify, to try and stop barriers appearing where we know. Let's try to address them before it becomes a problem. But I say that there's a lot of things as planners. We don't decide what applications come in. We don't choose the sites, the heights where the turbines are going. You're reacting to that. So there's a part there, I think, for the industry to play and for us to understand where they're coming in relation to that and their requirements. I know a number of delays, again, have occurred simply because applications, I think there's been a tendency in the past, it's perhaps more noticeable here than some other places that I've worked, is that planning authorities try to sort out the problems when the application is in to get them over the line. You know, that adds delay. Every time you change a plan, every time new information comes in, the requirements are such that, you know, it adds months to the timescales. So for me, I think there's a case of how do we get the right applications into the system in the first place. I think there's a lot to be said for pre-application application discussion, just to get the right information in at the place. But yeah, there's a lot to go on. I say very stringent targets, and I think it's incumbent upon all of us to, you know, try to take forward the improvements as best we can. I think we've had really good engagement, I think, with statutory consultees. A lot of that has focused around even getting planners that have the confidence say, I don't need to consult on this. How do you take the load off the consultees as much as possible? There's all sorts of little strands that you need to play with. But I hope that's addressed the question.
It does. And you talked about the two-tier system that we now have. Within that second tier at local council, it does strike me that there is a variety of tiers within that, those that are doing particularly well and maybe those that are struggling, and that's evidenced, I think, by the amount of renewables that they're able to deliver in an acceptable time frame. And I said it's 10 years now next year until it's fully devolved down, until local councils were fully operating under RPA, and I think it's the local development plans have been moving at a snail's pace effectively, given that some are still in a draft stage. I know that a part of those need to be influenced by SPPS, and I'd say less than underwhelmed in terms of some of what I've seen in terms of those draft proposals. Are you happy with what you've seen coming out of the 11 draft local development plans in terms of their ability to deliver a Northern Ireland-wide renewable strategy? Because it does strike me there's a lot of parochialness in there, and it doesn't seem to me to be completely joined up yet, unless I'm missing something.
Yeah. I think, again, we'd all like to have, you know, further progress in the local development plans, but again, it's back to that point. It was a completely new system. The councils are doing this for the first time. We're doing it the first time as ourselves, as DFI, with a dual role as a consultee and an oversight role. So you do have to get used to those. But in terms of what we're seeing, you know, we engage as much as we can with councils. You know, we've upon very good engagement with councils, or you know, we're trying to advise them to start that regional context, the oversight. But again, it's very much for the councils these days to, you know, these are their plans for their areas, and and to create their policies for, for their future. And, they are creating plans with an evidence base, and what we're looking at is that going to independent examination in front of the Planning Appeals Commission. And so all these items are being talked about, and we're reacting to the recommendations. I mean, that's the two-tier system. So in terms of that, yes, we are having our input into that, and reacting to that in terms of the final direction where we have to. But I think in general, the whole idea is for the plans to be in conformity with the regional development strategy, strategic planning policy statement, having regard to those documents. And that's the starting point. And then it's the evidence. If the councils provide evidence to go somewhere else, then that's what. Yeah.
Sir, I suppose I appreciate that it is devolved and that those 11 councils have a responsibility ultimately for their own development plan, but 80% renewable targets is highly optimistic. And I think it's a good thing, but if we have different councils operating with different priorities in terms of how they deliver that, I think you could end up seeing one council run away with doing particularly good things, another council be not playing ball to the same degree, and then we don't manage to hit that target because there's no one council can deliver that full 80%. So that's my fear, that we don't see the same approach being taken and the same optimistic approach being taken across the country. The final point I have, just Chair, is regarding the definition of noise pollution and shadow flicker in relation to applications for wind turbines. That's due to be changed. I'm just wondering what impact you think that will have on applications.
Is that's in terms of the 10-time router?
Yes, the wording in relation to the assessment of noise from wind turbines and shadow flicker.
Yeah, well, in relation to noise, the standard that's used here and England, Scotland and Wales is ETSU R97, and that's the responsibility of the Department of Energy and Net Zero. That is still the agreed standard, and that is the one that is still being used, and that will continue to be the case as far as we're concerned until there's any change to that, and that would be what's proposed. And then when an application comes in, obviously they'll consult with, or depending on who the planning authority is, engaged with the Environmental Health Department just in relation to the noise assessment that has been submitted, to ensure that there are no amenity concerns. In relation to shadow flicker, again, there's such good modelling that's able, 130 degrees either side of north is the only area where you'll get an issue of shadow flicker, and it's only a narrow window, when the sun's at a certain point in the year, and again, there's assessments that agents and applicants can do to make sure that they can assess what is the likelihood of shadow flicker occurring and how long during a day that can happen and how long over a year, for example. And again, then that would be a material consideration as to how acceptable that may be in terms of impact on amenity. But shadow flicker is generally it's a very low occurrence of actually impacting on anyone.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you
very much.
Cahill?
Thanks, Chair. I'm just trying to figure this out. There's not too many questions left after all. No, I want to pick up on a couple of points you made, because this is one thing. I've been around this for a long time, the plan in general, from my own experience. And obviously, clearly we're trying to get it better. Just the 2 points, and I know they've picked up most of them. See the pod process. If we're serious, that is a good tool and a good element, and we definitely need to use it better. Now, I know there's no commitments or anything else, but we should be having broader conversations now, getting those conversations right. And I know myself and all of us has experienced different architects and different agents down through the years, but be it single applications or be it substantial applications. But I think there's an opportunity that. The other one, and obviously you've mentioned that shadow flicker. I just want to ask a question in terms of, are we looking at now? Where are we in terms of looking at single wind turbines and wind farms itself? Are you just looking at that process? You mentioned there about different shadow flicker and all. How are we going to achieve that? Because the thing for me is, it's always going to be the processing times on 3 years, and I'm in all my experience, no matter how many times we sat in the rooms, no matter how many discussions we've had, I would just like to see something brought forward where you have everybody in the room and they have the proper conversations, and it's always the start of the process, you know. So, like I say, most of the questions have been asked, but just your general commentary and what you're feeling in early indications and all of that.
No, thanks for those questions. I think you're right in terms of the pre-application discussion. We see that for major applications. That's very important. That initial contact is very important in terms of trying to identify what you might need to be submitted with an application, or indeed not. It might be, we don't need that. You don't need to waste your time in that. That helps focus the thing, which will hopefully get through the process quicker. And it's important because planning is a very complex area. It's become much more complex over the years since when I started, as my grey hair will attest to that. In terms, and in relation to our engagement has been very much to date with renewables industry, Renewable NI, who I believe will be coming to you next month. They are the bodies coming in very much with the big wind farm proposals. In terms of individual turbines, I think my general experience is they tend to be dealt with by, perhaps they're not the big companies, or there might be a more tenuous.
Oh no,
link to them,
I should have asked in context of the LDPs and everything else. But hard because we know that we have identified areas right across the north where those wind patterns are in the best use, down the valleys and everything else. So we've had all these conversations, and those are the kind of big conversations. If we're serious, John asked about the LDPs and talked about 2030. So I'm only assuming that we have out on this. It's just in my experience.
Can I just say as well, just for the committee members' interest, since powers have transferred to councils, there have been 931 renewable applications approved, and that's been 36 wind farms, 644 single turbines, 110 solar applications, 32 hydro, and a number of others as well. So it's just showing that the system is working in terms of when the applications are put in the right way, as you've said, and the engagement's been right, and the system is facilitating appropriate applications to be approved. In the last statistics, the first 3 quarters of this year, there have been 51 out of 54 renewable applications have been approved, with a 94.4% approval rate for renewables. And again, the average processing time was 30.8 weeks, but that was down from about 60 the year before. So I do feel that things are going in the right direction. There are the wider issues that Alistair has talked about around maybe grid constraints and, a support and subsidy. We know the impact the Nairo had back in the day. So, if they're, DFE are working on a scheme at the moment, and if that was to come in, I'm sure the applications will increase as well. In terms of our Renewable NI's Accelerating Renewables report, which was published last year, they talked about one of the success stories is the supportive regional strategic planning policy that they do have here. Now, I'm not saying that doesn't mean they don't have asks when we put out the draft consultation, because of course, as Alistair's already said, they have particular concerns around just how much weight is given maybe to the climate change agenda. We appreciate that there's opposing views to that in relation to that shouldn't be the determinant factor on its own. There should be concerns around the environment and amenity as well. The 10 times rotor diameter and the spatial approach concerns would probably be their key concerns, and we're considering all of those in the mix in relation to all of the responses. But I do think that the figures probably show quite that the 40% was achieved by 2020, and we are on that path. Another, again, at the minute we're sitting at 45.8% renewable consumption, in the 12-month period, January 23 to December 23. But, we know that wind is intermittent. So if you look at specific months, December 23 was 59.5%. February 22 was 76.5%. So again, there's supporting technologies that maybe can help with the grid issues and things like that to get what is being produced onto the system. And you know, all the work that has been going on with DFE and renewables has been to try and all go in the same direction. And the policy that we're trying to, you know, bring forward here is really to put it in that context of the Climate Change Act, the targets, the, you know, the energy strategy work, you know, and to bring factors that we didn't mention, although the SPPS was a very, you know, is a very good policy and supports the appropriate development in, you know, in my view anyway. There are things like repowering and co-location and things that were never mentioned in that, so of course it needs to be brought up to date.
No, and I appreciate all the answers so far. It's just, you look at the regional strategy, then the SPPS, then you look at the local development plans, and local authorities, their own autonomy, and are ambitious themselves in what they're trying to do, and we have to marry those up rightly. And this is a good opportunity, but we need to have all those conversations for every one of those groups. And I know we're talking about renewables today, but long term this is going to play a key part. But like I say, slight concern about the 2030 and the targets and everything else, to be honest.
Thanks,
okay,
Carol.
Thanks, Chair.
And I suppose as MLAs it was agreed in the chamber. But I am going to move to Stephen.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks, folks, for your time. Just picking up some similar comments to what others have said, or just around, obviously, you know, we have the 11 different planning authorities and councils here, and I think they all have different ways of working as well, albeit they are implementing the same policies. Certainly they should be. But as we've seen with the LDPs, they're all at different stages, and you mentioned about planning is a balance ultimately as well, and it's a balance for planning officials and elected members on those committees as well. So I suppose just how do you feel that having that such a variation in a relatively small country, how does that impact upon us, I suppose, meeting and getting closer to meeting our renewable targets? Do you feel even with the, you know, small applications which would naturally, you know, come to the councils?
Yeah. I think, as you say, every council, you know, will have its own ways of operating, but they are operating to that broad policy set by ourselves, and which will then come down into their own local development plans. And yes, and local democracy and accountability. I think. In my experience, there's no reason in principle why, you know, we shouldn't be able to get, you know, the right applications through to approval. And I suppose I'm saying, you know, it's getting, planning is all about getting, if you boil it down, it's about getting the right development in the right places, and you know, that's very much the key. And we do know, as has been mentioned earlier, some of the councils, you know, have been better at getting applications out the door than some others. That's the nature of the beast, depending upon various council circumstances. But from my perspective, again, the planning system is there and can deliver on getting the right applications. And by deliver, I should really say we can facilitate that target. You know, we cannot deliver it on our own. It's back to that particular point.
Yeah.
So.
What role do you have then in terms of engagement with the councils? You know, are you actively monitoring their renewable applications and so on? Is that something that happens regularly within your own department?
It's basically we engage, you know, quite a lot with the heads of planning on a regular basis. So that's an area where we talk about more strategic issues. And things like that, where, you know, we, again, if we're talking about renewables, we have had a couple of very good workshops with council planners in there as well. I think those are the places that we need to get together, get our heads around what we need to do. And again, that's all about understanding each other and the industry. And I think if we can continue that engagement and improve upon that can take us quite a long way. But in terms of overall figures and so on, Catherine, is there?
So there are the statistics that are published, and the last statistics in the last quarter with regards renewables. There is information on that, and Joy has just said with regards looking to see what the targets are being met in the councils. You know, we're not doing that at present, but say we would obviously monitor that in the sense that they're published in the statistics that Joy has mentioned.
Yeah, no, that's grand. Obviously, you mentioned about the narrow heights change from 16 and 17, and I know I was on the planning committee at that time. You know, in certain areas of my constituency, were obviously a lot of very attractive areas for turbines, and that has changed quite dramatically. That's interesting. Just your comments around the future of that too on that support. So, no, that's great. Thanks, folks. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, members. I'm just going to remind you we do have 2 other areas we need to look at as well. So, if we just keep our questions to the point and brief, and if you don't mind, if we can keep answers as brief and concise as possible, Mark.
Thank you, Chair. To be fair, I think the first 2 kind of
they do.
There's a bit of crossover. So my questions,
Even still, Mark,
traverse the 2 as well. First of all, welcome to the team for coming along. Welcome the paper, and I suppose put on record our support for hitting the targets, but a degree of cynicism as to whether or not we'll even come close. I don't know. In fact, I don't think that will be particularly attributable to planning policy, and our performance, or will the slowdown in performance to date, I don't think is particularly attributable to policy either, but more down to implementation, practical issues, and even personnel or lack of personnel and resources, be it within the centre in the department or across the councils. But with this renewed focus on renewables, would it be your hope or aspiration, I suppose, that it will maybe focus minds on, I suppose, the importance of planning, the role the planning has, and that might be matched by increased investment?
Yeah, I think if there's one thing a target does, is it focuses you in on trying to achieve that target and to contribute that as best you possibly can. And yeah, I'm certainly hoping that the Climate Change Act and the policy coming out will focus minds throughout everybody involved in that planning process to achieve that, see how they can achieve that. But you're right. I think if we are to achieve things, then we do need the appropriate resources in the right places. We may need to look at how we prioritise things. So from our own point of view as a department, how can we force things through? So I wouldn't disagree with the statement that you've made there, that we need to be looking at that, and hopefully that we get an idea of, if we're to achieve the targets, or again, to help facilitate that, what resource do we need to do that within ourselves and throughout everybody involved in the planning system.
No, I think that's extremely important. It's going to be critically important too that we have that consistency across councils. Others have made mention, I suppose, of the transfer of the planning function to councils. I think it's fair to say it left more than the system in tears. There is a perception out there, misplaced or otherwise, that some councils are underperforming, whereas the reality might be more that planning in some councils is possibly undervalued and subsequently underfunded and under massive pressure that's making recruitment and retention even more difficult and suppose prolonging or perpetuating the problems there. So, like you've said, how you can try and ensure consistency across councils to a degree, but sorry, excuse me a wee second, I've notes made left, right and centre here. The community benefit, is there much in the new policy in terms of it, or do you foresee a role for community benefit clauses in renewable applications in a way that might actually benefit the community more than a set of shirts for the under 14s or the current system, but a way that local communities can actually derive low cost electricity that's being generated in their immediate area?
Yeah, I do know, many applicants, they come in terms of community benefit in terms of their applications, but to a degree that sits out with planning. The applications follow on their own particular merits as opposed to any particular benefit. So our point of view is, that's great. The people might be able to work with the communities to provide them benefit from these things, but in planning terms, we've got to focus in on the hard planning issues rather than that. I know there's been a few court cases in relation to that as well.
And Cahill had mentioned the PAD process or PAD, and certainly that has potential to do even more or be even better. But the other things in there's the PAC. Does it have much of a role, do you think, in terms of helping us achieve targets? And there are any issues there? And then you might think it's maybe ultra crepidarian. Well, of you to go there or beyond your remit, but obviously there is a planning ecosystem there, and we have to look at every part of it.
Yeah, I can speak as somebody who was a planning appeals commissioner once upon a time ago, so I don't decry the amount of work that they have to do or the difficulty of their job in relation to that, but they are an important part of the ecosystem. You know, I think everybody is an important part of it, but you know, in terms of getting, you know, recommendations in relation to the bigger projects which may send to public inquiry. They also have a role in establishing the meaning of policy at core there. So again, it's important that they are appropriately resourced to be able to do that at the moment, and we do know that they have a resource issue there. And I think again we would just you know, it's back to that point. You said the right words. Planning is an ecosystem. And all bits of it need to be working effectively if we're to move forward and help facilitate these targets.
And also, suppose in terms of policy and implementation, there's also strong political leadership required to ensure that policies are ensured adequately as well. But no, we'll come on to that later. Thank you.
Thank you. Look. Lastly, just on this, if you wouldn't mind touching on this just very, very briefly till we move on, but in paragraph 129 of the revised policy, it notes that development proposals in the marine environment are managed under a separate regime within the framework of the UK Marine Policy Statement as amended. Does the proposed North Channel Wind project fall into this category? And if so, what engagement has DFI had with other jurisdictions on the North Channel Wind project? Just very briefly, if you don't mind.
In terms of North Channel Wind, I know our team have been engaging with them in terms of, you know, very much the start of the project, in terms of scoping out, you know, we're at this stage we're scoping out what they might need to submit as part of an application. Things that are offshore do largely fall within the marine aspect. It's at low water tide. You know, it's when the power comes to shore and how that links up with the grid. That's when terrestrial planning will come into play. So really, what's important there is that you know, we are in good communication with our colleagues in DERA who are taking through the marine planning aspect and the terrestrial planning aspect, so we know what's going on and that we're looking at you know, the project as a whole. But again, as with any company coming into us, if they're looking to discuss a project that might be regionally significant, we're there, we're ready to try and help them through that system as best we can.
And you're having those discussions with other jurisdictions then too?
We haven't had the need to discuss with other jurisdictions the North Channel Wind project. At the moment we're looking at it from our particular.
But will those discussions happen? It
would depend upon whether there's an impact on another jurisdiction. To a degree, we need to see what the proposal is like. Okay. You know, where necessary, we would discuss with other projects. But again, the bulk of the project will be marine based. We would have very little involvement with that. It's when it hits shore with us, that's the particular point. Okay, and I know, as Mark helpfully pointed out there was a bit of overlap in terms of the call for evidence in terms of strategic plan and policy statement, but I suppose just from my point of view, it's just going back to my original point, you know, will the committee be provided with detailed analysis of the consultation responses and proposed way forward before any decisions are made by the Minister in relation to it? And Chair, in relation to that, we will brief the Minister and we'll raise that particular point with him if that's acceptable to you as to when to engage yourself. Again, there's been no decision yet that there will be a review of the policy. This is just to inform the potential for that.
Okay. Members, do anybody have any specific questions just in relation to that element, or are you happy to move on to the planning application validation checklist? Yeah. Okay, so just in relation to that, the checklist, there will, it's stated, that there will be degree of flexibility of councils to adopt an approach tailored to their local area and particular circumstances. Time and time again, as we have even just discussed in the course of this conversation, you'll hear about different councils doing different things in relation to planning and in terms of the timescales and everything relating to the different councils. And, are we in danger of creating yet again another sort of layer where there is going to be differences across council areas in terms of those checklists where there's a flexibility? Because, sorry to be parochial, I know I'm chair committee, but I do represent multiple council areas in my area, and it is a frustration for people, where they're maybe 2 miles down the council border, they would have had a different outcome. So could you maybe point to some of that?
Of course, sure, I'll take that. The first thing to say is that the validation checklist is an action that everybody wants. So there was unanimously in the consultation response, 100% of people want this to be put in place. I also want to say that we're making really good progress with it. And part of that was working, as Alistair has said, with the Planning Appeals Commission. The purpose of the SR is to put in place, the hook is to put in place the legislative framework, and then it's for the councils then, as you say, to put in place their own planning validation checklist. And that's important because we do have 11 autonomous councils, and they do differ. Some are very rural, some are urban. But the next stage in the discussions, we've been working with the office as a critical friend. The next stage in the discussions is actually working with consultees. So I know you had rivers in before, and they mentioned about floodplains. So there will be a commonality on the certain types of applications, or the certain types of subject matters that those applications will have, or those checklists will have. We're encouraging the councils to work very much together. We're drafting regional guidance. And we'll be speaking to the consultees and also speaking to the councils. The purpose of the validation checklist isn't to be onerous, it's only to be asking for the information that's required. And that's where the guidance, I think, is going to be really important for that commonality.
And when's the amendment of legislation likely to be brought forward then as a...
So, as I said, at the minute we're working with the Planning Appeals Commission on the dispute mechanism. That's really important, because if we put a new piece of legislation towards you, we need to make sure that it's right and it's fit for purpose. The last thing we want to do is introduce something into the planning system which is going to cause more delay and more uncertainty into the system. We are working really hard. We would hope to be in a position, subject to the conversations with the councils and with the PAC, to potentially give the committee something before summer recess, and if not, then for when you come back in September.
Okay. Deputy Chair?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Chair covered the two key points I was going to, but just the other one was around the dispute mechanism that's due to be factored in for applicants around potentially the pre-validation checks, as I say it. How is that going to work out in practice? Are they able to question the inclusion of some pre-validation checks, or are they able to question how they're applied? I'm just curious to know how that's going to work out, and is it going to be laborious, potentially?
So we've looked at Wales. So Wales have this in place. They have a standalone, and there's actually only 10 a year, less than 10 a year, that are actually appealed. Okay. What we have found, looking at all this other jurisdiction, is that an awful lot of the work goes in between the applicants and the agents and the councils to have informal discussions and sort that out. And there's a back and forth discussions to see whether or not it's needed. And again, that's where the guidance is going to be very important, to say this isn't a shopping list. This is only the things that are asked for have to be material. So I suppose if the applicant can demonstrate and question that, then that's where that discussion is going to be really important with the local councils.
So eradicating the hurdles before they have to jump over them effectively. Yeah. Okay, that's all I need to know. Thank you.
Thanks, you, Chair. Cahill.
Yeah, thanks, Chair, and listen, thank you very much for your answers so far, and I certainly welcome this. I think this is a key player in moving the process, and whilst there are the questions about renewable energy, I think right across the planning system this is going to if we get this right. And I mean, I was going to ask about the dispute making. Obviously, there needs to be a challenge in there as part of the system, and I don't dispute it. But I think the earlier we have the conversations and iron out, because we know what's out there already, we've good experience at it, and we just need to get it right. And certainly, it wouldn't take away from the autonomy. Like I say, like yourself, the 11 councils have, and then there's a mixture of urban and rural. But we can't be talking about encouraging renewable energy and targets, looking at climate change acts and everything else, if we don't look towards local authorities having a part to play as well. But I certainly, following today's conversations, the pods on this checklist are going to be two key elements going forward. I do believe, and I welcome, and certainly I would like this committee to be kept up to date in terms of that there, because I think it's going to play a major part, and as long as we get it. Now, Belfast City, see, in terms of Belfast City Council, they what engagement has there been, or what feedback has there been in relation to this? Or they piloted this, isn't that right? Yep.
Oh, no, they already have an administrative validation check in place, and they've had it for a number of years. And I should say also that many other councils as well have it to some degree or another. And the councils that we've spoken to are really pleased with that administrative. They say it's really working, and that's why there is an excitement within the planning community that they'll actually go into statute, because we fundamentally agree that with you that there is, if we can get those quality applications front loaded from the very start, that is going to really stop some of the delays in the systems. Means that quality application is going to get to a consultee. And even right down to when it gets to potentially before the Planning Appeals Commission, that information is actually going to be present. So we've been working with Belfast City Council as a critical friend on this, just to talk about the practical outworkings of the legislation. As I say, we are then going to take it to the other councils, and again, it's really important to be engaging with the consultees as well, because they're going to also then tell us, specifics of what they'd like to see.
Okay, and obviously looking at the statute, and then they'll have to comply. But see, just finally, Chair, see in terms of what negativities you engage with Belfast, has there anything cropped up in terms of negativities from agents or applicants or anything else that we need to tease out as part of the process?
Belfast have actually done a review of their planning validation checklists, and they have found that working with the agents and negotiating with them often resolves issues, and they don't foresee much dispute coming forward, and it definitely has helped front load their planning applications, and they're welcoming the discussions that we're having, and they're welcoming us going out to the wider councils and getting consensus on how the regional guidance is going to be drafted, and ensure there's some consistency, albeit each council may have specific requirements, but on the whole, how the actual process operates will be taken through the regional guidance.
And just one final question, Chair, and I suppose it goes right across the board. Resources is an issue for us, yeah, and going to be an issue going forward. Yeah, because I believe in this, like I said, the pods and this here will definitely ease the burden, but I couldn't resist that question, because resources, we need to have this conversation, Chair. But just a final comment if you want to make it, yeah.
Okay, Mark, and then Keith.
Thank you, Chair. It's just coming in the back of Cahill's question, and he put it out there about resources. And I'm sorry, I had technological trouble during the week and hadn't been able to fully read this paper. But what way does the fee work? Is there a fee? Do you know, is it an application fee once the validation checklist has been done? Because then there is obviously a resource implication. If you have planning officers going back and forth with applicants and agents, but no money coming in essentially to cover that.
The intention would be that the planning application is submitted, and the council goes through the validation process. If there was something missing, they would then work with the agent to try to get that information submitted within a period of time. If they could not agree, either if the agent did not submit it or the agent said, I don't agree with what you're asking for, then the council would issue a notice of invalidity, and everything would be returned to the applicant with the fee, and it is therefore out of the system in the council. the applicant then has 14 days to appeal to the Planning Appeals Commission, and they will notify the council if they have done that, and depending on the outcome of the appeal, it will only, if it's valid, then the applicant can send that back in to the council with the notice from the PAC saying it's valid, and the council will start processing the application.
Okay, but if the person isn't able to get all the information within that time, like, due to no fault of their own, but maybe down to another statutory consultee,
so that's the negotiation at the outset. So if they can speak to the council and say, we appreciate that, we need this time, that's a matter of negotiation between the council and the applicant. So that's discussions for them to have. The legislation won't dictate how long that period of negotiation is. The only time a time frame will come in is when the notice of invalidity issues and the 14 days for appeal, to ask for an appeal.
Will the legislation, I suppose, reach its tentacles into those other statutory consultees? Do you know, so the importance of this process is flagged up with them and the role that they have to play? Because I spoke of the under-resourcing of planning, but a lot of the problems we see in planning are down to the other bodies being under-resourced as well.
There's been a planning forum for a number of years, which is now changed its name to a planning statutory consultee forum, and that's been really helpful with a couple of representatives for local government as well, and the department sitting on that. And this is where we have these conversations, so they're aware of this validation checklist, and they say it is a very positive tool as well.
Thank you.
Okay, Keith?
Yeah, that has answered a few of my questions. Thanks for coming along. So, explain to me the process. I never went through council, ever. I was in a different world. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with anybody that went through council.
Thanks.
So, today, if I put an application in today, if I put that application today into council, okay, fill out my application form, let's say it's for a wind turbine, how do I know what I have to provide today?
So at the minute, usually for an application, well, you maybe be speaking to
or house, whatever you want, whatever it is.
Well, I can start. Normally people will appoint an agent,
yeah,
and that agent will guide them through.
Good or bad agent?
Normally people do their homework, and then normally appoint somebody. When you're spending that amount of money, they will appoint somebody with a record who's able to assist them through that process. And so there's, you know, if you look at planning applications that are in, there is a set amount of information that's like, there's a very low bar for validation, I should say, but there is a set amount of information for each type of application. And again, that's where it comes back to the importance. If it's a major application or really significant, it's really important then if you can enter those discussions with the council at the earliest opportunity.
Do you not find today that there's we talked about tennis before you come in, there's a game of tennis between the agent and the council, and the council decide, oh, I need this now, go away and do that, then they provide that, then after 3 months, now, oh, you need this. That goes on for months.
And that is where the validation
so the validation checklist, fair enough, is going to be right for this application. You need A, B, and C. And who decides that they don't? I think maybe John touched on who decides that they don't have a list with. So just supply everything to keep yourself right, but there's a cost to supply everything. So who's going to have that debate, and at what point in time? Maybe as you were touched on earlier, is that going to be an early stage of debate?
So I suppose in the regional guidance, that would set out that the checklist should be proportionate, precise, only asking for the information that's required. Now, a list may be extensive, but that's not saying that every application would need that. And this is where the dispute mechanism is important, because the council may say, we consider that item is required, and the applicant would say, I don't think that's the case. And if they cannot agree on that, that's where the PAC come in, and that's important to have that in place.
So how many applications do you think today would have solved the problem with additional information required? You're talking 50-60%. So if that validation checklist had been in place 5 years ago, it would save a lot of bother. So how many applications today in the current process has issues with not enough information and a game of tennis going on?
Yeah, that's very, very hard to say, because you'd have to look at each application to see what...
And if you look at Medulsa Council or any of them, look at it, all you see is need more information, need more information, need more information, and the application just goes on and further and further and further. Let's say 50% for argument's sake. When did you review the Planning Act 2011? To see, I'm looking at your paper here. that you wanted to implement this. When was that done?
So that report was published in 2022.
Okay. So it's only 2 years, fair enough. Okay. Fair enough, thank you.
Enough, Keith?
Yep.
Anybody else? Mark?
It's just one wee one, and it's kind of following on from Keith's there, and it's that sort of, I suppose, the MOT approach that some applicants take currently. They put in an application and wait to hear from planners what's wrong with it or what needs done. But for example, say a BAT survey or something is required, and I know each application would obviously be looked at in its own merits, but would something like that be identified in this process? Because then if that's done too early and it's going to take a while to process the application, then it might be out of date or need renewed by the time the application comes to be decided upon.
I mean, I know, having spoken to Belfast, if they identify that ecological surveys are required on receipt of the application and they're outside of the season to get those surveys, they are returning the application and saying you're going to have to come back to us at the appropriate time with the appropriate surveys done. And that's how they're operating at the moment.
Yeah.
And that's an application not sitting in the system, not getting processed.
There is a considerable outlay for some of those things that people will wait to see that they're clearing the other hurdles before they pay that. Okay.
Cathal, I think you were looking back in.
Chair, just a final point. Thanks for raising that point, Mark. And I know there's nothing we can do about this. We call them agents or architects, whoever makes the applications. I mean, the duty, is it responsible? Because say a single applicant wanted to fill in their own application, and we can't put a duty on an architect or an agent now. Keith put it well there, good or bad, but I would say there's experienced people out there and there's not experienced people, in my experience, who are able to handle applications and fill them in properly. There's others who out there who are not. So in this start, have we looked at that? I mean, obviously you've had that conversation in Belfast when they've done the review, that they've outlined a number of issues that's come up and say we need to go about it this way or that. So my point is, when we finish this process and bring this through, what's going to be there to, whose responsibility is to ensure that those people who are making the application do know that the evidence that they need required to fill out the application is there? Is that going to be in statute itself? Like you mentioned the BAT surveys there, which is only carried out a certain time of year, so there's no point in putting it in the month of December or whatever.
The way it's envisaged, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, the way it's envisaged is that obviously the legislation sits, then each council will have their own validation checklist, and there'll be an annex to that. So for each application type, there'll be almost like bullet points of what they would be expected, and that will be maybe drawing from what consultees or past practice within the council. So they would have a guide, and obviously, as always, there are usually planning clinics within councils or our planners here happy to have those conversations.
That's good enough. Yeah, no, fair enough. Yeah, thank you. Yeah. Thanks, Chair.
Members content? Yeah. Thank you very much for coming to the committee today. We really appreciate it, and we're looking forward to seeing some of that as we go forward as well. That'll be really useful. So thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Chair. Members.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah, certainly.
Okay, members, there's just a few points I want to just raise as a result of some of that. You'll remember that we do have some correspondence from some bodies, one of which was North Channel Wind. So I'm just seeking agreement to forward the Minister's response and advise that planning has been identified as one of the strategic priorities for the committee, and that the request to provide a briefing will be considered at an appropriate time in the work programme, and members content with that.
Great.
And then the Forum for Better Homes as well, I just want to advise you of the same regarding the fact that this is a strategic priority for the committee, and that they'll be included in the forward work programme. I'm sure it was music to all of our ears to hear that the legislation is expected before the summer recess. So we'll soon see what comes forward in relation to that, or else whenever we're back, it's either something to it will be something to look forward to regardless. Anyway, the forward work programme is at item 9 of your agenda, and you'll see at page 204 is the draft forward work programme. So I'm just informing members that the department proposes to forward proposals for 2 statutory rules for which the committee may wish to receive oral evidence. The first relates to the proposal for a stopping up order in Warren Point, which will be subject to negative resolution procedure, and a number of objections were actually received to the proposal. So to help inform consideration of the proposal, we may just wish to have a short oral session on that to hear about how the objections have been addressed. And then the department has also asked for the opportunity to provide a short oral briefing on a proposal for zero emissions vehicles mandate regulations, which would be subject to draft affirmative procedure. So you'll see we'll have a bit of time there on the 22nd of May. So I'm just seeking agreement to put those 2 briefings into that session for the 22nd of May, which is next week. So are members content with that? Yeah. And then obviously the forward work programme will be updated to reflect any decisions that we have taken today. So I'm just seeking agreement to proceed with the evidence sessions and strategic planning as set out in the draft forward work programme. All content with that? Yeah. So item 10 is any other business. I see the Deputy Chair's indicating.
Yes, Chair, thank you. We had a unanimous agreement, which is nice at times, in the Chamber yesterday on the extortionate insurance premiums that people are now paying, and I'm led to believe that the ABI are giving evidence today trying to justify those extortionate premiums. Be interesting to see if the committee could get its hands on, I think, the 52-page submission that they gave. I know we straddle a bit of that responsibility, and I know we have very busy work programmes, so it might not be applicable to get them in here, but I think it would be good at least to get that report. I know Cahill was going to maybe come in.
Yeah, Chair, and I know we'd asked a number of questions before and we got some response back, but we are awaiting more information. But certainly I would try, if where possible, we'll tie in with the economy. It'd be interesting to hear what happened today and the conversation went on today, but like I say, following on, we had a good enough debate last night, and it's important to try and tease this out from our perspective, but with information, we're waiting on information back, isn't that right, from the...
Through you, Chair. Yes, we the committee has asked the FCA for it's carrying out a review in the summer and some other work that's ongoing, and the committee has asked them to provide that when that's available, but that could be some time off. And you also requested a research paper, which will actually be in the pack next week. I just received that yesterday, so it will be in the pack next week. And if you wish, we can ask if the Committee for the Economy will share that paper. I'm not sure whether they'll be able to, but we can ask.
And it's just following on from some of their conversations today, because they may have moved on and said they may have issued the right to, Conduct Authority again today, arising from their meeting. It's just, we don't have to duplicate that. If they've already done it, we'd just like to share in the information.
Yeah.
Okay.
And look, I suppose we're looking forward to seeing some of that. I mean, we did ask for quite substantial amount of information to come back as well, and in terms of the research too, so we'll certainly be keeping an eye on it going forward, that's for sure, even though if our hands are somewhat tied in relation to what we can actually do on it. But anyway, any other items of business, members? All content? Okay, so the date, time and location of the next meeting, it will take place at 10 a.m. Next week, 22nd of May, here in room 29, Parliament Building. So I'll see you all next week. Thank you, and I'll now adjourn the meeting.
ABCD, right?
Committee room 29, sound. 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 Committee Room 29, sound.